I was kicked out of my house and told I was worthless. What happened next will surprise you. I never imagined I'd need to write something like this one day, but I think there comes a time when we need to let out everything that's been bottled up inside. I've always tried to please my parents, especially my father. He was always the kind of man who believed success meant having a degree, a suit, a high salary, and status. And I grew up hearing that if I didn't follow that path, I'd be a failure. At first, I believed him. I thought maybe he was right. But as I grew older, I realized that what truly kept me going was working with my hands. I felt good tinkering with wood, fixing things, seeing something come to life from scratch. But back home, it was a source of shame. My father said it was work for people with no future, and my mother added that I'd end up like those sweaty men who never got anywhere. Each sentence they said killed me a little inside. My name is Bernardo, I'm 17. And the day I was kicked out of my house was the day my life truly began, even though at the time I thought it was the end. That day began like any other. The house was silent, that kind of tense silence that only exists in families who can't stand each other but pretend everything is fine. I had just come home from school and had a silly smile because Mr. Jorge, the owner of a local garage, had asked me to help him on Saturday. I was going to earn some money, learn some new things, and that made me excited. But when I told him, everything came crashing down. My father looked at me with that look that mixes anger and disappointment. He said I was embarrassing him, that I looked like a beggar, and that his son wouldn't stoop to that. I tried to argue, but the more I talked, the more he yelled. My mother, Helena, joined the conversation just to add fuel to the fire. She always had a calmer way of belittling me. She never yelled, but every word was calculated to hurt. She told me I was ungrateful, that I didn't think about everything they did for me, that I just wanted an easy life, and that destroyed me because I just wanted to be understood. I wasn't dropping out of school. I just wanted to try something different, see what I truly liked. But no one would listen. My sister, Lucia, pretended it wasn't her problem. She closed the bedroom door and let the chaos unfold. I remember looking at my mother, then at my father, and realizing there was no room for me there anymore. I wasn't seen as a son. I was a project gone wrong. And when I realized this, I felt an absurd fear of being thrown out into the world, but also a relief that perhaps, finally, I would be free. My father's words were the last I expected to hear. He shouted, "If you want this mediocre life so badly, then get out of here and live with your tools." I froze. I stood in the middle of the living room, clutching my backpack in disbelief. My mother said nothing. She just looked away. Her silence was worse than any scream. I still tried to argue, to say that wasn't what I wanted, that I just wanted some support. But he went to the bedroom, grabbed an old suitcase, threw it on the floor and told me to get by. I remember my hands shaking, trying to hold back the tears so I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing how broken I was. I grabbed some clothes, my wallet, and left. No hug, no words. The door closed behind me with a thud I've never forgotten. I walked aimlessly for hours. The sun was already setting and I still didn't know where to go. I only knew I couldn't go back. The feeling was a mixture of fear, shame, and a strange kind of freedom. I cried in secret, like a child, because deep down, I still was one. I was only 17, with no money, no plan, no home. I remembered my friend Paolo and considered going to him. He was always the only one who listened to me without judging me. When I arrived, he opened the door and saw my swollen face. He didn't need to ask anything. He just said, "Come in, man." That simple gesture saved me more than he could imagine. It was the first time in a long time that I felt someone truly saw me, not as a mistake, but as someone trying to find themselves. Staying at Paolo's house didn't solve anything, but at least it gave me some air. It was a place where I could breathe without feeling the weight of judgment on my shoulders. As I sat in his living room, contemplating what I was going to do, I felt a mixture of anger and relief that I can't quite explain. Anger at having been kicked out by my parents, anger at everything they'd done throughout my life, and relief that for the first time, no one was telling me I was a mistake. Deep down, I also felt scared. I was 17 years old, with nothing in my hands but a backpack and wrinkled clothes, but I wasn't going back. There, sitting in Paulo's living room, I began to realize that my life could be different, that I could make my own choices, even if they were painful. In the days that followed, I began to truly fend for myself. It was difficult. I slept at Paulo's house, walked for hours carrying tools, looking for job opportunities. Every door that slammed in my face seemed to confirm what my parents said, but each small victory also gave me strength. Mr. Jorge, my boss at the workshop, was one of those people who believed in me without knowing my full story. He taught me how to really work, how to earn hard-earned money, and most importantly, how to trust myself. Every nail I hammered, every piece I assembled made me more aware that I could support myself. The anger I harbored toward my parents still lingered, but I began to transform it into something useful. Every criticism, every scream, every look of disappointment became fuel to prove I could follow my own path. I cried alone. Yes, I felt fear, insecurity, and a desire to give up. But I also felt a clarity I'd never felt before. No one can decide your life for you. That was my time to learn to fend for myself, to take responsibility, to build something that was truly mine. I remember one night in particular, sitting in the back of a delivery truck with Mr. Jorge, tired after a full day of work. I was exhausted, dirty, with cut and calloused hands, but I felt something I'd never felt at home. Pride. Pride in myself, in having faced pain, rejection, and fear. I finally realized that the dreams they'd tried to stifle in me weren't impossible, just different. Different from what my family expected, but legitimate. And amidst all this exhaustion, I realized I still had hope. I could rebuild my life, step by step. I didn't need my parents' recognition to be someone. I had Paulo by my side, Mr. Jorge teaching me, Marina arriving little by little, with attention and care, and Donna Rosa, the neighbor, always giving me simple but truthful advice. I began to understand that even when expelled, even alone, I could create my own supportive family, my own safety net. And it was like that, amidst pain, anger, and small victories, that I realized I was beginning to truly transform. As the days went by, I realized that freedom came at a high price. Sleeping at Paulo's house couldn't last forever, and I needed to find my own space. It was at that moment that I began to truly feel the weight of responsibility. Every choice I made now had consequences. I had to learn to cook, wash my own clothes, organize my time, and still find some way to earn enough money to support myself. It all seemed impossible at first. I was afraid of failing, afraid of making mistakes, afraid of going hungry or sleeping on the streets. But I also felt a strength I had never felt before. I was alone, yes, but for the first time, I was in control of my own path. Working with Mr. Jorge was an experience that changed the way I saw the world. He had no patience for laziness or excuses, and this forced me to grow quickly. Each day was a physical and emotional battle. I would arrive with sore arms and cuts in my skin, and yet he would tell me, "This is just the beginning, Bernardo. Learn now or you'll regret it later." I realized that, although he was demanding, he was fair. And I began to understand that real life doesn't wait for us, and that every effort I made had a direct impact on my future. Each completed project was a small triumph, a reminder that I could overcome despite everything. Still, the absence of my family hurt. It wasn't just the lack of home, it was the feeling of being unaccepted, of being rejected by those who should have supported me unconditionally. I cried in secret, remembering the arguments, the yelling, the comparisons to my sister. Every memory burned inside me, but I learned to use it as strength. Every criticism they made became fuel. Every disapproving look reminded me that I didn't need their approval. I could be strong, even broken. I could stand up for myself, even scared. And little by little, that pain began to transform into determination. Marina came into my life during this period, and her presence was important. She didn't try to convince me of anything, she just listened. She just let me be. And that, as simple as it may seem, made a difference. Having someone who believed in me without expecting anything in return gave me the courage to keep going. Little by little, I began to realize that I could rebuild my life even without my biological family supporting me. I was learning that true family sometimes isn't the one who gave you life, but the one who's willing to support you when you need it most. Donna Rosa, my neighbor, also helped me with practical advice and simple words that made me feel cared for. She said things like, "Bernardo, no one will give it to you for free, but if you don't give up, it will work out." It sounded cliché, but in that moment, with everything collapsing around me, those words were a light. I began to see that my expulsion wasn't the end, but the beginning of my real life. For the first time, I felt like I could create something of my own, with my own rules, my own achievements, and even with fear, pain, and longing for the home I'd lost, I began to believe that overcoming this was possible. Over time, I realized that the biggest battle wasn't just against my parents, but against what I believed was right for me. Every night I spent alone, every day working until my body ached, I wondered, will I be able to support myself? Have I chosen the right path? Fear accompanied me every step of the way. But I also realized that even though I was scared, I was moving forward. Every nail I hammered, every wall I helped build in the workshop was a small victory against rejection, against pain. And even tired, I felt a clarity I'd never felt before. I was finally living according to my own will. The following weeks were tough. I went hungry a few times, and there were days when it felt like I couldn't go on. But every time I felt defeated, I remembered Mr. Jorge's look. When I completed a job well done, or Paulo and Marina's supportive smile, it was as if they were telling me I wasn't alone, even when my family had abandoned me. That small support network kept me going, and I began to feel that the future, though uncertain, was mine to build. My parents' anger didn't disappear, but it began to fade because I was proving to myself that I could handle myself. The first time I received my own full paycheck, I felt something I can't describe. It was hard-earned. Money, and no matter how little, it was mine. For the first time, I realized I could support myself, that my choices had value, that I didn't need to depend on anyone who didn't believe in me. It was a moment of relief, pride, and hope. I remembered every harsh word I'd heard at home, every criticism, every disapproval, and instead of tearing me down, those words served as fuel. I knew nothing could stop me anymore, because I was finally living my own life. I still missed home, of course. It still hurt to think that my parents had kicked me out, that my sister never cared, but I began to see my life from a different perspective. Pain taught me resilience, taught me to fight, taught me that I could endure more than I imagined. Every hardship I faced, every day I woke up tired and scared, but decided to keep going, was a small achievement. I began to realize that being kicked out of my home didn't define me as a failure. On the contrary, it gave me the strength to prove that I could support myself, that I could grow, that I could be happy on my own terms. It was during this period that I understood that overcoming pain isn't about ending it, but learning to live with it and transform it. I learned that fear, anger, sadness, abandonment, all of this could be transformed into fuel to move forward. I began to make my plans, to dream again, to believe that my life wouldn't be limited by what my parents wanted or expected. I began to feel proud of myself, proud of what I was. Building, even if it was slow, even if it was difficult. Freedom came at a high price, but I could finally say I was living my own life, and that was greater than any pain I carried. As the months passed, I began to realize that my life was truly changing. The fear I felt when I was kicked out of my home was still there, but it no longer dominated my thoughts. I had a purpose. I knew I could support myself and that my choices were valid. Every day, I arrived at Mr. Jorge's workshop and managed to complete a complicated project. I felt my confidence grow. I no longer depended on anyone to validate my efforts. I was learning that happiness doesn't come from other people's approval, but from doing what you love and feeling useful. This was a lesson no one in my family taught me, but one that life forced me to discover. Paolo and Marina continued to be my support. Without them, I probably would have given up a few times. Paolo, with his solid and loyal friendship, always reminding me that I wasn't alone, and Marina with her patience and understanding, showing me that love doesn't require conformity, only respect. Donna Rosa continued to give me simple but meaningful advice, like, you don't need everyone to understand, you just need to be true to yourself. These people were my chosen family, and little by little I realized I could be proud of the life I was building, even without my parents' support. The day I finally realized I'd turned things around wasn't dramatic. There was no celebration, no applause, no grand announcement. It was simple. I looked at my paint-stained hands and wood, looked at the pieces I'd painstakingly built and realized this was mine, my life, built with hard work and my own choices. I realized that the anger, fear, and pain I felt when I was kicked out of my home had transformed into determination and courage. I had survived, learned, and grown. And for the first time, I felt proud of myself without relying on anyone. Today, when I look back, I see that being expelled was what made me realize my own strength. Nothing my parents said or did could destroy me. On the contrary, it pushed me to discover who I truly am. I still feel pain sometimes. I miss home, but I learned that I can create my own path, my own family, my own security. Overcoming grief isn't an endpoint, it's an ongoing process. And in this process, I learned that I can be happy in my own way without asking anyone's permission. My name is Bernardo, and I'm writing this to say that even when all seems lost, it's possible to bounce back. It's possible to transform pain into strength, abandonment into learning, rejection into determination. Today, I work with my hands. I learn, I grow, and I can look in the mirror and recognize someone who hasn't let themselves be broken. I know I'll still feel fear, but I've learned not to let it paralyze me. I've learned that true freedom comes from believing in yourself, from persisting, from fighting every day. And that's what keeps me going, with hope and courage, even after everything I've been through.
I was humiliated and exploited by my parents for years, but what happened next will shock you. I never thought the most important day of my life would also be the most painful. My name is Julia. I'm 17 years old, and until a few months ago, I lived a suffocating routine in my own home. My parents, Emmanuel and Laura, didn't see me as their daughter, but as a nanny for my siblings. I woke up before everyone else, made coffee, tidied my rooms, took the younger ones to school, and still had to help with tasks that weren't my responsibility. I received no recognition, no praise, not even a word of thanks. Whenever I tried to say I needed time for myself, to study or work, they reacted angrily. I felt angry too, but it wasn't enough to change the situation. Deep down, I was tired, exhausted of being invisible in my own home. The feeling of being used and devalued was constant. I felt alone even though I lived with my family, and I realized that if I wanted to survive and make something of my life, I would have to fight alone. This day that I'm going to tell you about was the day I decided that I could no longer accept that exploitation. I woke up that morning with a mixture of fear and clarity. I knew I needed to leave home, but the thought of facing my parents and losing my roof over my head was terrifying. I grabbed my backpack, put my books and a few essentials in it, trying to organize my thoughts while my brother still slept. I felt a tightness in my chest, a mixture of guilt and relief. I knew they would never understand my decision, but I also knew that staying meant continuing to destroy myself emotionally. Working at the coffee shop, studying, and applying for a scholarship were my only paths to survival and independence. Each step I took out of my room felt heavier, but each step also reminded me that I was finally choosing my life. It wasn't an easy decision. I felt fear, shame, and pain, but also a strange sense of liberation. When I spoke to my parents, their reaction was immediate and intense. Emmanuel yelled, telling me I was ungrateful, that I was destroying the family, that I had no right to leave my place. Laura just remained silent, her face closed, but her look said she was disappointed. It was humiliating. I felt anger and deep sadness, but I didn't back down. Something inside me broke and strengthened at the same time. I realized I could no longer allow them to define my life. The moment I left home, carrying my backpack and my fear, I felt I was leaving behind not only my home, but years of exploitation and disrespect. Arriving at my maternal grandparents' house, Nuza and Ricardo, was like breathing for the first time in a long time. They welcomed me with hugs, tears, and words I hadn't heard in years. "We're here for you, Julia. Everything will be okay." The feeling of security was instant, something I hadn't even remembered existed. My grandparents became my emotional support, my safe haven, my reminder that I wasn't alone. For the first time, I felt I could cry without shame, rest without guilt, and reflect on my life without fear of reprisal. That day marked the beginning of a new phase, where my autonomy and my dreams began to find space. That same day, I realized the battle would be difficult, but necessary. I began to organize my routine: study, work, and time for self-care. It was exhausting, but also liberating. I was afraid of failing, of disappointing those who helped me, but I also felt proud that I was finally making my own decisions. Every small achievement, like managing my schedule or making my first purchase alone, seemed enormous compared to everything I had experienced before. I knew the following days would be challenging, that my parents might try to guilt or manipulate me, but I also knew that, for the first time, my life was in my hands. I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. On my first day at my grandparents' house, I felt a mixture of relief and anxiety I'd never felt before. Relief at being in a safe place, with people who truly loved me, and anxiety at knowing I still had a long way to go. I looked at my younger siblings, who were with me, and realized how much I'd carried on my shoulders alone. The responsibility, the weight of caring for 4 children when I needed care myself, was almost unbearable. But in that moment, I felt I could begin to share that burden with people who truly cared about me. My tears mingled with shy laughter, and for the first time in years, I felt I could breathe without guilt. My grandparents helped me put my life in order in a practical way. Ricardo showed me how to organize my studies and work routine, while Nuza prepared meals and talked to me about my feelings. I never imagined that feeling such consistent support could be so transformative. Each word of encouragement seemed to shatter years of fear and insecurity my parents had instilled in me. I began to believe that I deserved more, that I could be more than just that family nanny. The feeling of being valued and respected was new, strange, but wonderful. I realized that my past didn't have to define my future. That week, my English teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, became one of the most important figures for me. She saw my hard work and guided me through scholarships and opportunities I never would have imagined. Feeling that someone truly believed in me gave me the courage to keep going, even when homesickness and the guilt of my parents' separation weighed heavily on my chest. I knew I needed to focus, learn, grow, and prove to myself that I was capable of building a better life. Every piece of advice she gave me was a step away from fear and exploitation. My friends, Megan and Casey, were also crucial. It wasn't just practical support, it was presence. It was feeling like I could laugh, cry, and be myself without judgment. For the first time in a long time, I felt I could be vulnerable without being exploited or manipulated. The combined support of my grandparents, my teacher, and my friends gave me a strength I didn't even know I had within me. I began to realize that my autonomy wasn't an act of rebellion against my parents, but a necessity for survival and growth. The real turning point came one morning when I managed to organize my studies and work in a way that had seemed impossible just days before. I sat at my desk, staring at my books, my mind clear and focused, and felt proud of myself for the first time in years. Tears came, but they were of relief and strength, not pain or guilt. For the first time, I felt I could achieve the life I always wanted, and that my choices were valid, even if my parents didn't understand or approve. That sense of control over my own life was liberating, and I knew in that moment that nothing could stop me as long as I believed in myself. In the days that followed, I realized that my life was truly changing, but that the process wouldn't be easy. I was afraid of making mistakes, of failing, of disappointing those who were supporting me. But at the same time, I felt a determination I'd never felt before. Every morning, waking up at my grandparents' house, I remembered how much I'd suffered and how much I deserved a chance at happiness. The physical exhaustion was enormous, because in addition to studying and working, I still had to help with small tasks around the house. But emotionally, I felt lighter. The feeling of being seen and recognized made all the effort worthwhile. My older siblings, Miguel and Emma, began to grow closer to me during this time. They also missed having a role model, someone who would support them without pressure. We spent hours talking about simple things, laughing at silly things, and slowly healing wounds that seemed impossible to heal. Their presence reminded me that despite everything, I wasn't alone, and that the love we felt for each other could strengthen us. That feeling of connection was something I'd never experienced, to the intensity I felt now, and it gave me the courage to keep fighting. Over time, my parents' hostility began to lessen. It wasn't immediate, but I noticed signs of remorse in Emmanuel and genuine concern in Laura. I don't know if that completely changed, but for me, it was enough. I didn't need their approval to continue living my life. I learned that my steps, my choices, and my determination were more important than any criticism or rejection. I began to feel proud of myself, and that feeling was so strong that nothing could erase it. My dedication to my studies began to bear fruit. With Mrs. Rodriguez's guidance, I was able to apply for several scholarships. Each application I submitted was a mixture of hope and fear, but I knew I was doing something for myself. For the first time, I felt like I was building a real, tangible future, not just surviving the present. Each small victory reminded me that I had the potential, that my story didn't have to be one of suffering alone. There were days when I missed my old home deeply, but I learned to cope. Talking to my grandparents, my friends, and my siblings helped me transform that longing into strength. I realized that the love I received was much more genuine and consistent than what I had experienced before. Every gesture of support, every word of encouragement, every look that said, "You can do it," strengthened me. I began to feel that despite the pain I carried, I could indeed build a life full of possibilities, and that no one could steal that achievement from me. One day, I realized I had changed from the inside out. I looked in the mirror and recognized not just my face, but my posture, my gaze, my way of reacting to the world. I was no longer the Julia who hid behind fear and guilt. Every step I took in my grandparents' house, every decision I made to put myself first, had transformed me. It wasn't easy, it wasn't quick, but I felt a quiet pride that no one could take away. For the first time, I realized that my story could be one of victory, not just suffering. My first days working at the coffee shop showed me how much I could manage on my own. Every service, every task completed without needing anyone else, gave me confidence. I felt tired, yes, but also a strength I'd never felt before. For the first time, I began to believe I could support myself, my studies, and my dreams. That feeling of independence, however small, was powerful. I felt like I was finally building something of my own, and that no one could take that achievement away from me. The search for scholarships became more than a financial necessity. It became a symbol of my strength. Every form I filled out, every test I studied, every extra effort was a reaffirmation that I was capable of and deserved opportunities. I wasn't just fighting for the present, I was building my future. Every email I sent, every positive response, reminded me that I was capable, that my dedication and effort weren't in vain. For the first time, I felt the world recognized me fairly, without exploitation or manipulation. My friends Megan and Casey became my emotional rock. They were there when I cried, when I was afraid, when I doubted myself. The feeling of having people who truly root for you, without self-interest or judgment, is liberating. I realized that emotional support is as important as any material resource. Every conversation, every piece of advice, every shared laugh reminded me that I didn't have to carry everything alone. I learned that asking for help isn't a weakness, but a way to grow and become stronger. One of the most memorable moments was when I managed to organize my study, work, and rest routine in a way that had seemed impossible just weeks before. I sat at my desk, took a deep breath, looked at my books, and felt like I could finally breathe without fear. I had built my own structure, my own safe space. For the first time, I realized that life could be different, that I could create my own rules, and that no one had the right to tell me who I should be. The feeling of control over my own life was both terrifying and liberating at the same time. The day I realized I had truly won was strange and silent. I was alone in my room, studying for an important test, and I felt a peace I hadn't felt in years. I looked at everything I'd achieved since leaving my parents' house, and realized that every tear, every fear, every moment of despair had led me to this point. I had an organized routine, emotional support, recognition, clear dreams, and, most importantly, the feeling that I could live my life without fear or guilt. It was at that moment that I understood. I didn't need the approval of those who exploited me to be happy. My relationship with my parents was still complicated, but it no longer carried the same weight. I felt anger, yes, but there was also room for understanding and clear boundaries. I learned that self-respect is more important than seeking approval. Every time they tried to manipulate or blame, I was able to react firmly without giving in. This feeling of power over my own life, even in the face of those who tried to control me, was liberating. For the first time, I realized that my strength didn't depend on their change, but solely on my decision to move forward. My achievements began to materialize: scholarships, recognition from professors, true friendships, and the support of family who had always been by my side. Each victory seemed small to outsiders, but to me, it was proof that I could transform pain into strength. I learned that no one had the right to limit me, that my determination could open doors, and that my effort was worth every second of suffering I endured. It was as if, finally, my life had truly begun. Today, I can say that I'm no longer the scared and overwhelmed Julia I once was. I'm a teenager who discovered her worth, found support, and learned to fight for her dreams. I still carry scars, of course, but they don't define me. They remind me of my strength, my resilience, and the importance of never letting anyone diminish me. Each challenge I've faced has brought me clarity and confidence to face the next. The life I've built, little by little, is mine, and no one can take it away. If I had to sum it all up in one word, it would be overcoming. I learned that it's possible to leave a toxic environment, seek true support, and rebuild your life with courage, even when it seems impossible. The process is painful, long, and full of doubts, but every step is worth it. Today, I have clear dreams, goals, and the conviction that I can achieve anything I set my mind to. Looking back and realizing everything I've overcome gives me the strength to continue growing, learning, and living fully. My story isn't perfect, but it's real, and every day I reaffirm that it's possible to overcome, even when all seems lost. I was controlled by my mother and husband, until a secret changed my life completely. I never thought I'd be able to write this. My name is Camilla, I'm 32 years old, and today I feel a mixture of relief and pain because I finally realized what it means to be myself, after years of living to please everyone. I grew up being molded by my mother, Lucia. She always knew how to use guilt, fear, and manipulation to keep me under control, and I naively accepted this as normal, because no one taught me that my own voice was worth anything. My father, Sergio, never helped. He remained silent, passive, letting my mother dictate everything, never defending me or offering me even a little support. The effect this had on me was devastating. I lived believing my role was to disappear, to annul myself, and to put everyone else's happiness and comfort above my own existence. When I met Andre, I thought it would be different. He seemed loving and present, but little by little he revealed himself to be just like my mother. Small criticisms, orders disguised as advice, subtle demands that made me doubt myself. At 32, I realized I was in an emotional prison that I allowed myself to build because I never learned to say no or demand respect. That day, everything exploded inside me. I was in the kitchen, Andre coldly commented on something I'd done, and my mother came in criticizing my way of organizing the house, which seemed so insignificant to any normal person. but to me was a direct attack on my ability to exist. In that moment, I felt a rage I'd never felt before. My heart raced, my hands trembled, and for a moment I thought I would fall apart. But something inside me ignited. I realized that if I didn't react now, I never would. I was tired of apologizing, of asking for forgiveness for existing, of living in fear of rejection and constant judgment. Desperation mixed with courage and absolute clarity invaded my mind. I needed to put an end to this cycle, even if it was painful, even if I felt alone. I looked at them, mother and husband, and for the first time I saw clearly what they were. People who wanted to mold me, control me, and who would never accept my freedom without resistance. It wasn't a lack of love, it was control. And in that instant, something shifted inside me. It wasn't a magical snap. It wasn't supernatural force. It was a decision. A raw and simple decision. I will no longer live to please anyone. I will no longer shrink myself to make them feel good. I felt fear, of course. Fear of everything that might come next. Fear of their anger, their shame, their loneliness. But I also felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt my own strength, a silent courage that had been dormant within me. I took a deep breath, trying to gather my thoughts. It was strange, because I was in the middle of my own home, surrounded by the people who had hurt me the most, and yet I felt a freedom I never imagined possible. I remember every detail. The sound of the sink running, the light streaming through the window, Andre's heavy breathing, and Lucia's judgmental gaze. Everything seemed to heighten my sense of urgency. Every criticism, every controlling word they uttered, fueled my determination. I needed to speak up. I needed to speak out, and not softly or politely, but firmly, humanly, genuinely. No longer hidden, no longer diminished. So I began to speak. The words came out shakily at first, but with increasing firmness. I spoke of how I felt manipulated, controlled, and suffocated. I spoke of years of fear, guilt, and submission. I spoke of the pain of never having my opinion considered, of the frustration of denying myself so they could feel comfortable. Lucia looked shocked. Andre tried to intervene, but I continued. It was frightening and liberating at the same time. For the first time, I used my voice. For the first time, I didn't ask for permission to exist. For the first time, I heard myself speaking, and their silence, after those words, was almost comforting. I knew this conversation wouldn't be easy, but in that moment, I knew the change had begun. After that first outburst of words, I felt a strange mixture of relief and fear. Relief at finally having said everything I'd been holding back, and fear of what would come next. Andre remained silent, but I could tell he was angry. Lucia, my mother, seemed to be trying to find some argument to silence me, but nothing worked. For the first time, no amount of guilt she tried to impose had any effect. I finally understood. The guilt that had suffocated me for years wasn't mine, it was theirs. And oddly enough, this gave me the strength to carry on. Every word that came out of my mouth reinforced my decision. I needed to free myself. I needed to exist for myself, no longer for their whims. For years, I thought that pleasing everyone was synonymous with peace, but I discovered it only brought me fear, anxiety, and a weariness that consumed me from the inside out. Now, the anger I'd felt for years was transformed into energy for action. I could no longer remain silent. I took a deep breath and continued, this time with more determination. I spoke about every situation in which I felt humiliated, invisible, or disrespected. I remembered every birthday I spent without joy, every decision I made to avoid conflict, every night I cried alone in my room, feeling like I had no right to fully exist. I remembered how much I tried to change my voice, my mannerisms, my body, just so they would accept me. And for the first time, I looked at them without fear. I felt an incredible clarity. I am not responsible for their frustration, nor do I owe my life to anyone. I deserve to live for myself, with my desires, mistakes, and achievements. This realization gave me the courage to move forward. As I spoke, I felt my body react. My heart was still pounding, my hands sweaty, but each word seemed to lift a weight from my chest. I was exhausted, but alive. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting to their control, but creating a space for myself, a space where my desires mattered, a space where I could breathe without fear. Looking at Andre, I realized he expected me to back down, to apologize, to put myself back down, but I didn't. I held my ground, firm, looking into his eyes, feeling each word echo within the house that once imprisoned me. Lucia began to speak, trying to manipulate me, telling me I was overreacting, that I was ungrateful, that everything she did was for my own good. But this time, I didn't give in. I didn't cry. I didn't stutter. I didn't cower. I took a deep breath and said I appreciated their efforts, but I could no longer live under control, that my emotions, choices, and life belonged to me, not them. The fear was still there, a nagging presence, but the clarity of my decision overcame any doubt. For the first time, I felt like I was taking ownership of my own life. At the end of that conversation, which lasted almost an hour, there was a heavy silence in the house. It was the silence of transformation. I was exhausted, my knees were shaking, my throat ached from talking so much, but something inside me opened. I finally understood that I no longer needed to live under the shadow of their manipulation. I had discovered my strength, my voice, and although there was still fear and uncertainty about what would come next, I felt for the first time that nothing could stop me. I was at the beginning of my freedom, and that day would be the turning point in my life. In the days following that confrontation, I felt my body react in ways I hadn't imagined. Every muscle felt lighter, as if finally letting go of years of pent-up tension. But at the same time, intense anxiety lingered. The fear of what Andre or my mother might do or say was still there, pulsing deep in my chest. But something inside me told me that even if they tried to break me, I wouldn't give in. For the first time, I realized that life didn't have to be lived under the shadow of fear and guilt. I could stand up for myself, say no, demand respect, and most importantly, believe my needs were valid. It was at that moment that I realized it wasn't about being brave all the time, but about acting even when I was afraid. I was tired of being weak to others, tired of existing to please them, tired of hiding. During that time, every look, every gesture from Andre and Lucia seemed to test my limits. I felt the tension in the air, and it was inevitable to remember all the times I'd given in, apologized undeservedly, and accepted injustice. But now, I responded differently. I learned to take a deep breath before reacting, to think about my priorities, and above all, to listen to my own voice. I discovered that emotional freedom doesn't come from confrontation alone, but from the constancy of staying true to yourself. Every decision I made, no matter how small, like choosing what to eat, when to rest, or simply not responding to an unfair complaint, was a silent victory. I was rebuilding my autonomy, brick by brick, and I felt like nothing could erase that. A defining moment was when I realized I no longer needed to justify my feelings. Before, any expression of sadness, frustration, or exhaustion was immediately accompanied by blame. You're being selfish. You're exaggerating. You don't understand the situation. But now, I could feel my emotions without needing anyone to validate them. I cried without shame, screamed mentally without fear, and even smiled lightly. Every sensation, no matter how simple, was proof that I truly existed, and that my life didn't need to be conditioned by other people's approval. I was learning to recognize myself as a complete person, entitled to desires, limits, and flaws. The change was also reflected in my outlook. For the first time, I didn't look away when faced with criticism or demands. I faced them, breathed, and decided whether or not it was something I accepted. I discovered that I could take a stand without causing harm, but also without shrinking. It's a delicate balance, and I confess that at times I failed, but simply realizing I no longer needed to live in silence was liberating. The feeling of power over my own life was addictive. Every choice I made it clear that I no longer needed constant approval to exist. The greatest lesson from these days is that freedom isn't instantaneous, but progressive. Each step I took to assert myself and respect my feelings brought me clarity about who I am. I was afraid of losing people, afraid of rejection, but the realization that I can't live to please anyone brought indescribable relief. It's a mixture of pain, anger, exhaustion, and, at the same time, strength, hope, and clarity. For the first time in years, I felt like I owned my own story, and this feeling is transformative. I knew it would be difficult, that there would be resistance and discomfort. But for the first time, I realized I'm not alone with myself. and that's enough to keep moving forward. Over time, I began to notice subtle yet profound changes within myself. With each small decision I made, I felt my autonomy grow. It wasn't something that happened overnight, but the consistency strengthened me. The feeling of fear that had previously paralyzed me still surfaced, of course, especially when Andre or my mother tried to pressure me. But now I could feel the fear, and, at the same time, act consciously, without automatically giving in. I discovered that courage is not the absence of fear, but the ability to move forward despite it. With each act of affirmation, like deciding not to respond to an unfair complaint, setting limits on my tone of voice, or simply withdrawing from an argument, I felt an energy of freedom invading me. For the first time, I understood that my voice had power and that my feelings were valid. Daily life at home remained challenging. Lucia tried to make blaming comments, Andre sought out small provocations, but I wouldn't back down. I learned to breathe, observe my feelings, and respond only when necessary. I discovered I didn't need to justify my choices or explain my limits. This awareness gave me a strength I never imagined I possessed. I felt the energy of my own life returning, and with it, a sense of relief I had never experienced before. Each time I maintained my posture, even in the face of resistance, my self-confidence grew. It was as if each act of affirmation was a brick in the construction of my emotional freedom. One of the most impactful things was realizing that my emotions weren't a problem. Before, any sadness, irritation, or frustration was seen as weakness, and I'd shrink away to avoid causing discomfort. But now, I could feel, cry, complain, get angry, and still remain strong. This realization brought me an incredible clarity. Living to please never brought me happiness, only exhaustion. I began to allow myself to live according to my desires, however small, and each step in that direction was a victory. Emotional freedom was slowly emerging, and I finally felt like I was rebuilding my own space within the house and within myself. I realized that profound change requires time, patience, and above all, the courage to face resistance. I still felt pain, frustration, and even anger, but I learned to channel these emotions to strengthen my resolve to no longer submit. Each time I maintained my stance, I felt my self-esteem grow, and with it, my fear diminished. It was an intense learning process, learning to respect myself, to speak up for myself, and most importantly, to recognize that my feelings are valuable. I discovered that I can live with people who pressure me without letting them dominate me, and that setting boundaries doesn't make me aggressive, but human. The impact of this change on my life was enormous. I began to feel alive again, something I hadn't felt in years. I discovered an inner strength I hadn't known, a resilience that allowed me to continue, even in the face of fear and resistance. I felt I was finally in control of my life, not in an authoritarian or vengeful way, but in a conscious and firm way. For the first time, I realized that emotional freedom is more valuable than pleasing others at any cost. I could finally breathe, exist, and feel complete, even amidst conflict and challenges. And that day, that moment when I decided to speak out and no longer remain silent, would be the milestone of my true transformation. Today, looking back, I see how much everything has changed since that day I finally used my voice. My name is Camila, I'm 32 years old, and I still carry scars, but now they're marks of strength, not submission. The change wasn't easy, and it's not something that happens overnight, but for the first time, I feel like I'm living for myself. Every time I set boundaries, every time I speak up to Andre or my mother, I feel a freedom that previously seemed impossible. It doesn't mean the fear has completely disappeared, but I've learned to live with it, using it as a wake-up call, not a prison. The greatest achievement was discovering that my voice exists, that my feelings matter, and that I can be whole without having to erase any part of myself. I realize that real transformation begins when you decide you will no longer submit to anyone's control, no matter how much they pressure you, manipulate you, or try to make you feel guilty. When you put yourself at the center of your own life, you begin to understand that everything you've been through doesn't define who you are, but rather how much you've endured, learned, and evolved. I still have moments of insecurity. There are still days when fear hits harder, but now I know it doesn't control me. I feel a clarity I lacked before. I can exist, make mistakes, learn, and move forward without depending on anyone's approval. Today I know that being firm isn't being cold, it's being human. I no longer need to apologize for feeling angry, sad, or for putting myself first. I discovered that the life I deserve isn't the one dictated by others, but the one I choose to build each day. My relationship with Andre has changed because there's now a limit he can't cross, and my mother has finally realized she can no longer control my life. Emotional freedom isn't just about fighting or yelling, it's about deciding every day that your existence matters. The moment of rupture was painful but necessary. Talking, expressing my feelings, and setting boundaries showed me that I have the strength to deal with any resistance. For the first time, I felt that my choices matter, that my opinion matters, and that I don't need to live to please anyone. The feeling of fully existing is indescribable. It's a mixture of fear, relief, anger, hope, and happiness I'd never experienced before. It's a freedom that allows me to breathe, laugh, and even make mistakes, without guilt. Today, I can say clearly, it is possible to free yourself even when it seems impossible. It is possible to find courage within yourself, even after years of control, manipulation, and submission. I did it. And although the journey continues, I feel I will never again be annulled by anyone. My voice exists, my life is mine, and each day is an opportunity to live fully, unafraid to be myself. Therefore, I say, don't be silent, don't shrink, and believe in the strength you carry within. It is possible to rise above. I am living proof of that. At my brother's wedding, I was humiliated in front of everyone. My reaction shocked the entire family. I never imagined that my brother's wedding day would be the day I would finally free myself from everything that held me back. I woke up early, with that weight on my chest that had been with me for years. The feeling of being out of place, even within my own family, seemed to stick to me like wet clothing. Since I was little, I'd learned to be the discreet one, the one who doesn't bother, the one who doesn't draw attention. And that day, once again, that was what was expected of me. Mom called me early to remind me to wear a neutral dress, nothing flashy, because it's not your day, daughter, it's your brother's. I swallowed hard and said, okay, Mom. But inside, something began to crack. I was tired of hiding myself so as not to hurt anyone's ego. When I looked in the mirror, wearing the dress I'd chosen, simple, but revealing the woman I'd become, I felt fear and pride at the same time. Fear of what people would say, but pride in finally seeing myself. I'd spent years feeling invisible, and now that I saw myself, I no longer wanted to disappear. I applied my light makeup, styled my hair the way I liked it, and left the house in silence. In the car, my heart was pounding. I knew there would be stares, comments, maybe even embarrassment, but I needed to allow myself to exist that way. Not out of vanity, but out of dignity. I no longer owed anyone anything. I arrived at the wedding hall, and the first person to see me was Daniela, my brother's wife. Her smile was one of those fake ones that you can feel even in your stomach. She hugged me, but it was a quick hug, her eyes scanning me up and down. Wow, Isabella, you look different, she said, trying to hide her discomfort. I just smiled and replied, yes, I do. For the first time, I didn't shrink to fit in. I felt the stares coming from my mother, my father, even my brother, who seemed unsure whether to praise me or apologize for existing alongside the woman who criticized me the most. It was then that I realized no one was prepared to truly deal with me. I tried to distract myself, chat with the guests, but the atmosphere was suffocating. I could feel people whispering, that feeling of being the talk of the town without having done anything wrong. My mother came to me with that usual sweet, venomous tone. Daughter, you look beautiful, but you could have worn a more discreet dress, right? Danny looked a little uncomfortable. The urge to scream was overwhelming, but I took a deep breath. For the first time, I didn't apologize. I just looked at her and said, Mom, it was her who felt uncomfortable, not me. She looked at me, startled, as if I'd spoken heresy. I felt my legs tremble, but also a strength I'd never felt before. It was as if I were giving myself back the space that had always been taken from me. The party wore on, and I could feel the mood between Felipe and Daniela slowly sour. She wouldn't take her eyes off me, as if my presence were an affront. Every time someone complimented my appearance or asked about the surgery I'd had, her expression changed. At one point, she came up to me, a glass in her hand and a cynical smile. You made a point of showing up, didn't you, Isa? I could have backed away, as I always did, but I didn't. I looked at her without anger and replied, No, I made a point of looking good. There's a difference. The silence that formed around me was heavy, but liberating. For the first time, I felt like she was on my side, and that alone was worth more than any approval. After that moment with Daniela, everything inside me seemed to spin. I felt ashamed for a few seconds, not for having responded, but for having spent so much of my life keeping quiet. How many times have I swallowed worse things just to keep the peace? How many times have I stopped wearing clothes, cutting my hair the way I wanted, speaking my mind just to avoid upsetting others? I've always been the good daughter, the one who understands, the one who gives in. And all I got from that was being forgotten, erased, treated like someone who had to ask permission to exist. The penny dropped there, in the middle of the party, with loud music and smiling people. Sometimes life's pain doesn't scream. It whispers in your ear and makes you see everything at once. I sat for a moment at the corner table, my heart racing, trying to understand what I was feeling. My father came over to me with that fix everything quickly way of his. He placed his hand on my shoulder and said softly, "Daughter, don't provoke, okay? Daniela is sensitive. Don't ruin your brother's day." At that moment, my blood boiled. Everything inside me told me it wasn't fair. I looked at him and replied without raising my voice, "Dad, I didn't ruin anything. I just exist." He stared at me, somewhat blankly, and I realized how much he didn't know me. It was strange to see my own father treating me like a nuisance when all I wanted was respect. That's when I realized my pain was never their problem. It was their discomfort in dealing with me as an equal. The night went on, and every word I heard seemed to confirm how much that environment was no longer mine. People laughed, danced, took pictures, and I felt like I was on another planet. I didn't want to fight, I didn't want to cause trouble, but I also didn't want to be annihilated. So I did something simple. But for me, it was huge. I got up, walked to the door of the room, and left. No drama, no scene. I just left. The street air hit my face, and I took a deep breath, as if it were the first time in a long time I'd truly breathed. I grabbed my phone, ordered a ride, and sat on the curb, looking up at the sky. I remember thinking, I don't have to prove anything to anyone anymore. And that felt like a beginning, not an end. On the way home, I cried. I cried everything I hadn't cried in years. It wasn't sadness, it was relief. It hurt, but it was a cleansing pain. I thought about everything I'd endured, the comments, the comparisons, the pressures. I thought about how many times I'd been told I should be softer, nicer, less intense. And I realized how much I'd lost myself trying to be what they expected. There, in that car, I made a promise to myself. I would never again diminish myself to fit into others' comfort zones. If I'm going to be loved, let it be for who I am, not for what they've invented of me. And for the first time, I felt proud of the woman I was becoming. When I got home, I took off my shoes and looked at myself in the mirror. My makeup was a little smudged, my eyes puffy, but there was something different in my gaze. I saw myself and recognized myself, not as the faded daughter, the invisible sister, the one who lives in the shadows. I was me, whole, wounded, but strong, and I didn't need applause to feel it. That night, alone in my room, I wrote in my phone's notepad, "Today I chose myself." And that simple act was more powerful than any approval I'd sought my entire life. I didn't know what would come next, but I knew I wouldn't go back. And that alone was a victory. The next day I woke up to my phone flooded with messages. From my mom, my dad, even Felipe. None of them asked if I was okay. They just wanted to know why I'd left the party without warning and left a bad atmosphere. It was like being punched. They were more concerned with appearances than with how I felt. For a moment I considered explaining myself, but I gave up. I always tried to explain, justify, fix things. Only this time I knew it was no use. They didn't want to understand. They wanted to control me. I deleted all the messages and put my phone away. I remained silent all day, feeling that mix of pain and freedom. It was strange not trying to defend myself, but it was a new kind of peace. Half hard, half sweet. The other day, Felipe showed up at my door. I thought he was coming to talk, to try to understand what happened. But no. He came to ask me to apologize to Danny to put an end to the matter. He said she had been crying, that she was feeling humiliated because of me. I listened quietly, looking at him, and when he finished, I asked, "What about you, Felipe? Do you think I did something wrong?" He looked away. He didn't answer, and his silence was the clearest answer I could have gotten. I realized that the favoritism, the imbalance, wasn't in my head. It was real, and he just didn't want to see it. When he left, I closed the door and cried again, but this time, it wasn't from sadness. It was from exhaustion, tired of being the scapegoat for a broken family system. The following days were silent. No one in my family reached out to see how I was truly doing. Only Aunt Clara sent me a message. Proud of you. It was time to let go. I read it and cried again, but this time it was different. I felt seen. That simple. Message was the first genuine gesture of support I'd received in a long time. She'd always tried to warn me about how things worked, but I didn't have the strength to resist. Now I understood what she meant. Sometimes, family love comes with a heavy burden of control, and we only realize it when we decide to walk away. It's not easy. It hurts terribly, but it's the only way to breathe. I started doing little things for myself. I went for walks without telling anyone. I started reading again, taking care of myself, leaving the house without fear of what people would think. I still felt the emptiness of rejection, but at the same time, there was a new sensation, a lightness, an inner space that hadn't existed before. It was as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders that I'd always carried. I realized that freedom hurts at first, because with it comes silence, loneliness, doubt. But it also brings a kind of strength that grows quietly, changing us from the inside out. I began to enjoy this solitude that left me at peace. A week later, I got a call from Fred, my brother's best friend. He'd always been more observant, more honest. He said, "Isa, Danny's freaking out. She thought you were trying to compete with her, but everyone could tell the problem wasn't you." I remained silent. He continued, "You know, I think she's always been envious of what's most simple about you. That authenticity that doesn't have to force anything." I thanked him, but deep down, it hurt. Because it was unfair. I never wanted to compete with anyone. I just wanted to be myself. But for the first time, someone outside the family saw what I'd been through. And that made me even more certain that I wasn't crazy. I was just waking up from a cycle that was never mine. Over time, my family's silence became routine. No calls, no messages. At first it hurt. I'd find myself checking my phone, waiting for some signal, some attempt to reach out. But the days passed, and I began to understand that emptiness was, in fact, space. Space for me. To breathe, think, rebuild. I began to look at my story with new eyes. They always told me I was cold, difficult, closed off. But the truth is, I only learned to protect myself. The coldness they saw was just a reflection of the lack of acceptance I felt. And now, without that constant emotional burden, I could finally hear myself. It was strange, but good. Aunt Clara started visiting me more often. She didn't come with advice or judgment, just presence. Sometimes we'd have coffee in silence, and that was enough. She said I reminded her a lot of my grandmother, a woman who also refused to be silent to please anyone. I liked hearing that. It gave me a sense of continuity, of not being alone in this struggle to be who I am. In these conversations, I realized how much the women in my family were taught to fit in, and how much this destroyed the individuality of all of us. I promised myself that this cycle would end with me, that if I ever had a daughter, she would grow up knowing she could be whole without guilt. Daniela, on the other hand, continued to try to maintain her perfect image. I saw some photos on social media, she and Felipe smiling, posting phrases about a blessed couple, but I could see in her eyes that something had broken. I didn't feel revenge, nor pleasure in seeing it. I felt sadness, because I knew that the control she tried to exert over me was, in fact, fear. Fear of being replaced, fear of not being enough. And Felipe, he remained trapped in this role of pleasing everyone, including her. I stopped expecting him to change. Sometimes loving a sibling also means accepting that they won't understand you. One day, after months, my mom texted me. She said that things were calming down and that Danny wanted to make amends. I read it and stared at the screen. Once, I would have said yes, just to please her. But now I knew what that invitation really meant. To go back to the same place as before, to shut up and pretend nothing happened. So I calmly replied, "Mom, I don't have anything against anyone, but I won't apologize for being who I am." She saw it and never responded, and I felt at peace, because for the first time, I didn't need her approval to feel good. My validation came from within. Things began to shift inside me, quietly. I realized that strength doesn't come from shouting to the world who you are, but from standing firm when they try to erase you. I stopped blaming myself for walking away. I stopped trying to understand what I could have done differently. Because deep down, I did what was necessary to survive emotionally. Sometimes the love of family hurts more than its absence, and I needed to lose the we to find the me again. Today, I see that wedding day wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of my real life. Today, when I think about that wedding day, I don't feel anger. I feel a kind of gratitude that's hard to explain. It was a tense, heavy day, full of stares and judgments. But it was there that I understood who I truly was. Sometimes life puts you at a critical moment before you finally choose yourself. I needed to be humiliated, criticized, and left aside to understand my worth. Not because they recognized me, but because I got tired of begging for recognition. I look back and see a woman who was constantly dimming her own shine so as not to bother others. And today, I no longer ask for permission to exist. After everything, I sought therapy. It was one of the best decisions I ever made. Talking about what I'd experienced, understanding where my pain came from, made me realize that I'd spent years carrying responsibilities that were never mine. I wasn't the difficult daughter or the jealous sister. I was just the one who saw what no one else wanted to see. Therapy helped me put a name to things. I learned that love without respect isn't love, it's control. And that being strong doesn't mean silently enduring everything. Sometimes being strong means saying enough and walking away even if you're shaking inside. Today, my family and I barely speak. At first, it hurt. But now I understand that distance is also a form of love. Love for myself. I've learned to enjoy my own company, to make plans that depend solely on me. I started a new course, changed my look again, traveled alone for the first time. Little things that, for me, mean freedom. I still have days when the pain returns, because family is a bond that never truly disappears. But now, when it tightens, I know how to handle it. I breathe, remember who I am, and move on, without guilt. Sometimes I get messages from people saying they miss the old Isa. I smile, because I know what they miss is the version that kept quiet to fit into other people's molds, that Isa no longer exists. The new one is quieter, but firm, less concerned with pleasing, more concerned with being true. I've learned that we don't need to explain ourselves to those who've never tried to understand, and that there's nothing wrong with choosing yourself. On the contrary, it's the beginning of everything. Loneliness, when it comes after courage, isn't punishment. It's rest. If anyone reads this and is going through something similar, I just want to say one thing. Don't wait for the world to validate you before you start seeing yourself. Sometimes the most painful day of your life is the one that will set you free. Mine was my brother's wedding. And ironically, it was there that I married myself. My truth, my story, my peace. My name is Isabella. I'm 27 years old. And after a long time, I can say with certainty, I'm okay. Not perfect, not complete, but at peace. And that, for me, is the greatest kind of victory there is.
I was betrayed by my brother and ignored by my family. But what happened next changed everything. I woke up that morning with a strange weight on my chest, a mixture of fear, exhaustion, and anger that I couldn't quite pinpoint. My name is Eduardo. I'm 32 years old, and at that moment I felt like my entire life had crumbled in a single instant. I looked at my phone and saw a message from my mother, Helena, reminding me that I had to attend my ex-fiancée, Bianca's wedding to my own brother, Raphael. My stomach churned. How could anyone feel so much humiliation in a single day? I was tired of feeling isolated within my own family, surrounded by people who judged success by money and status, and who couldn't see my pain. I felt shame, of course, but also a deep anger, mixed with that feeling of helplessness that eats away at you from within. Everything felt wrong, but there was a bitter clarity. I had to do something, and I couldn't just sit around complaining anymore. I arrived at the wedding feeling heavy in body and even heavier in mind. Every fake smile, every forced hug reminded me that none of this was mine. Bianca was there, radiant, as if nothing had happened. Raphael, smiling with that confidence that always irritated me, seemed to own the world. And my mother, happy, gave me disapproving looks as if I were the outsider. It was unbearable. Every step I took in that hall felt like a direct blow to my pride. I tried to take a deep breath, but the air felt too heavy. I felt small, invisible, betrayed in every way. But amidst all that pain, I began to realize something. If I continued to allow myself to be crushed, I would have no chance of turning the page. Something inside me ignited, a desire to prove to myself that I wasn't finished, that I still had the strength to fight. On the way home, I couldn't stop thinking about everything. In the car, alone, my mind began to work in a way I had never allowed before. I'd always been an analyst, a forensic accountant, someone who deals with numbers and hidden truths. And suddenly I realized that this skill could be my weapon. Raphael and Bianca had done everything to appear perfect on the surface, but there are always cracks in the facade when it comes to money and business. That thought gave me a strange sense of control, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Anger began to transform into focus. For the first time, I thought, I'm not going to be a victim anymore. I'm going to find the truth and show it to everyone. And that clarity, even mixed with pain and exhaustion, was the spark that would change everything from then on. I spent the day replaying every detail, every conversation, every slip-up Raphael and Bianca had made. I began mentally gathering information, suspicions, everything that could be used to expose their true colors. At the same time, I felt a mixture of guilt and fear. Fear of making a mistake, of getting too entangled, of suffering even more. But there was also something I hadn't felt in years, hope. Hope that I could transform all that betrayal into something that would strengthen me, that would restore my worth. It was strange to feel hope alongside so much pain, but it was real. I needed to believe I could do something right, that all was not lost. And it was in that moment that I realized this wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice, about clearing my own name and regaining my pride. Late that afternoon, after long hours of sitting silently in my apartment, I realized I needed to act immediately. I grabbed my computer and began reviewing old documents, contracts, and financial records. Every detail I remembered about Raphael's business dealings gave me a sense of controllable power, and for the first time I felt like anger could be used productively. I felt less powerless. I began writing a mental plan for how I could gather evidence, how I could protect my own integrity while exposing the fraud. It was both terrifying and exhilarating. For the first time since the wedding day, I felt there was a way out, that I could transform this pain into something concrete. That day wasn't just about humiliation, it was about realizing I had the strength to turn things around. That night, after I turned off the computer, I felt a mixture of physical and mental exhaustion that felt like it would break me, but wouldn't let me sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Bianca's smile at the altar, Raphael's arrogant posture, my mother's disapproving expression. It was suffocating, but at the same time, something inside me was awakened. I knew I needed to transform that pain into action. I needed to regain some control over my life. I spent hours mentally organizing every step, every possible path I could take to expose the wrongdoing, but without letting myself be consumed by hatred. It was a delicate but necessary balance. I felt fear of exposing myself, of making a mistake, of doing something that could harm me, but I also felt a clarity I had never felt before. For the first time, I understood that my experience, my knowledge, could be my strength in a moment that seemed hopeless. The next day, I began reviewing every financial document I could find about Raphael and Bianca's business dealings. It was meticulous, exhausting, but somehow it made me feel alive again. With each number, each suspicious transaction that surfaced, I felt a pang of anger, but also a rising sense of justice. It was strange to realize that the same rage that consumed me could transform into something concrete and powerful. For the first time, I didn't feel powerless in the face of betrayal. I was using my skill, something that had always defined me, to create a path that could change everything. The sense of clarity grew, along with the determination to not allow those who humiliated me to continue unpunished. It was painful, but also liberating. In the midst of that analysis, I realized how alone I had felt throughout my family life. My parents had always favored Raphael, always thought he was the perfect son, while I was constantly criticized, isolated, and devalued. And yet, for years, I tried to please everyone, tried to fit into expectations that weren't mine. Now, seeing the full extent of their actions, I felt a mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness for everything I'd been through and the burden I'd carried, but relief at finally seeing that I could use my own strength and intelligence to bounce back. For the first time, I felt that my pain had a purpose, that it could be transformed into something positive and concrete. While I was working, Gustavo, my friend and confidant, called me. He always had an outside perspective on my situation and, in a way, helped me ground myself. Talking to him was like opening a pressure valve. I said everything: anger, shame, fear, pain. He listened without judgment and offered me perspectives I hadn't considered, simply sharing my experience with someone who understood my suffering made me feel lighter, more confident that I wasn't alone. It was an invisible but real support. I began to realize that even in the darkest moments, small connections could give me the strength to keep fighting. Feeling that someone believed in me was a silent but essential turning point. Late in the afternoon, after hours of intense work, I finally managed to gather concrete evidence that could reveal Raphael and Bianca's wrongdoing. The exhaustion was physical, but the feeling of internal victory was overwhelming. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't just reacting to the pain, but creating an action capable of changing my reality. The fear was still there, of course, but now it was accompanied by something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope and determination. It was strange to feel that the same pain that crushed me could drive me to build something solid. It was at that moment that I realized that this familiar humiliation could be the catalyst for my own overcoming, for reclaiming my pride and my life independently, without relying on anyone's approval. The next morning, my body felt heavy, almost as if all the anger and anxiety of the last week had transformed into physical pain. But strangely, there was also a sense of purpose I'd never felt before. Sitting at the kitchen table, staring at papers and spreadsheets, I realized that all my experience as an accounting analyst could be used for something bigger than just numbers. It could be my way of reclaiming my worth and protecting myself from the humiliation my own family and Bianca had inflicted on me. Each suspicious transaction I reviewed was a small step toward regaining control of my life. I felt scared, of course, scared of making a mistake, of losing my temper, of ruining everything. But at the same time, I felt a growing strength, a clarity that told me I could do this. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting to pain. I was creating something concrete that could change my life. And that gave me a sense of relief and determination I hadn't felt in years. As I reviewed the information, I also felt anger rising, but in a different way. It was no longer that blind rage that paralyzed me. It was anger that transformed every mistake, every betrayal into fuel for action. I felt shame too, shame for having allowed my family and Bianca to devalue me for so long, but that shame began to blend with self-pride. I was using my skills to defend myself, to show myself that I didn't need their approval to be someone. The sense of control was new and frightening, but also incredibly liberating. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe without the pain completely overwhelming me. I called Adriana, my aunt, without much thought. She had always been critical of the favoritism within the family and, in a way, my voice of support. I needed someone who understood that I wasn't just angry, but trying to do something fair. Talking to her brought me immediate relief. It was as if someone finally saw my pain without judgment. She encouraged me to move forward, to be careful, but not to back down. That conversation was an emotional turning point. For the first time, I felt I wasn't alone, that there was someone outside that cycle of family humiliation who truly cared about what I was going through. It was a huge comfort, and it gave me even more strength to carry on. By mid-afternoon, I began organizing everything so it was clear and comprehensible. Every detail I remembered about Raphael and Bianca's business was being recorded, analyzed, and cross-referenced. The physical and mental exhaustion was intense, but there was a sense of focus that energized me. Each step made me feel more capable, more confident that I was building something that could truly change my life. The anger was still there, but now mixed with hope and determination. I felt like I was finally using my pain for something positive, and that this gave me power over my own story. It was a feeling I hadn't felt in years, perhaps since before I felt betrayed and humiliated by my own family. When night fell, I realized I had spent hours completely focused, without noticing the passage of time. I was tired, exhausted, but with a sense of purpose that could not be ignored. For the first time, I felt that my pain was not just suffering. It was motivation to act concretely, to protect my integrity and seek justice. There was still fear of making mistakes, of exposing too much, of facing family reprisals. But there was also clarity and determination. That day showed me that even amid betrayal and humiliation, it was possible to find strength within myself, to transform pain into action and hope. For the first time, I felt I could rewrite my own story. The feeling of helplessness that had consumed me had become a focus. I sat at the table, reviewing every financial detail Raphael and Bianca had tried to hide. The anger was still there, but now it served as fuel, not something that paralyzed me. I felt fear too. Fear of making a mistake, fear that something would go wrong and I would lose all chance of proving the truth. But along with the fear came a quiet confidence. I knew my abilities were real, that my insight could make a difference. For the first time, I felt like my own intelligence and experience were my strongest weapons. It was a strange mix of physical exhaustion, mental tension, and an almost painful clarity about what needed to be done. For hours, I worked almost non-stop. Every suspicious number, every poorly explained transaction, every incomplete document became proof of what my intuition was telling me. Raphael and Bianca were not only personal traitors, but also accomplices in financial irregularities. I felt an intense mix of emotions: anger, shame, fear, but also a growing sense of justice about to be served. It was the first time in a long time that I felt in control of my own life, of my own story. This feeling was both overwhelming and liberating. The pain of betrayal was still there, but now I was transforming it into action, into something concrete that could change everything. Mid-afternoon, Gustavo contacted me again. He had gathered some outside information that could complement my work and help me solidify the evidence. Talking to him brought me immediate relief. It was as if I finally had someone by my side who understood the gravity of the situation and didn't judge me for feeling so much pain. His presence gave me the confidence to move forward, made me realize I didn't have to carry everything alone. For the first time, I felt I had allies, even outside my family, and that gave me the strength to not back down. It was a feeling of hope I hadn't felt in years, mixed with an almost blind determination to do the right thing. By late afternoon, I realized I had gathered enough evidence to take concrete action. The exhaustion was overwhelming, but the sense of inner achievement was even greater. For the first time, I didn't just feel pain or anger. I felt like I was creating something that could change my life, my reputation, and my self-esteem. It was the first time I realized that all the humiliation I'd experienced could be transformed into something positive, that I could use my knowledge and intelligence to protect myself and regain control. The fear still lingered, but now it was accompanied by hope and strength. For the first time, I felt I could take a real step toward overcoming my own problems. As night fell, I sat alone in my apartment reflecting on the day. The mix of emotions was intense: sadness at the betrayal, anger at family favoritism, fear of what was to come, but also an unprecedented sense of purpose and clarity. For the first time, I felt I could transform all the pain into concrete action, that I no longer needed to be a victim of circumstances or the cruelty of others. Each step I took that day was a small personal victory, proof that I still had strength, intelligence, and courage. For the first time, I realized that overcoming adversity isn't about erasing pain, but about using that pain to build something solid and true within myself. I was tired, but more alive than ever, and I finally felt my story could have an outcome I controlled. The next day, I woke with a strange mix of exhaustion and relief. The intense hours of the past few days still weighed on my body, but my mind was clearer than ever. Looking at all the material I'd managed to gather, I felt a quiet strength growing within me. For the first time, I realized I was no longer a victim of the situation, that I had found a way to transform all that pain into something concrete. Every detail I analyzed, every piece of evidence I organized was a step toward my own emotional and professional freedom. The feeling of control was new, almost unbelievable. For the first time, I felt I could face Raphael, Bianca, and even my own family without fear of being crushed again. I spoke with Adriana that day, and once again felt the impact of genuine support. She not only validated my feelings, but also reassured me that I was doing the right thing. This external confirmation, coming from someone who had always been critical of family injustices, made me feel that my action wasn't blind revenge, but rather a form of justice and personal healing. For the first time, I could see that my anger and pain could be transformed into something useful, that I could use my own intelligence to protect my integrity. It was liberating to realize that I no longer needed to submit to the humiliation of others. In the following days, I began contacting authorities and organizing everything legally and safely. Each step I took gave me a sense of clarity and purpose. The anger was still there, but now it was mixed with hope and determination. I realized that overcoming didn't mean forgetting what happened or ceasing to feel pain. It meant using those emotions as fuel to rebuild my life. I no longer needed my mother's or family's approval to feel valid. I was creating my own narrative, and this gave me unprecedented strength. The process wasn't easy, of course. There were times when exhaustion, fear, and anxiety nearly paralyzed me, but with each challenge, I remembered how that initial day, when I felt anger, fear, and clarity all at once, had been the turning point. Remembering that feeling gave me the courage to keep going, to not give up, to prove that I could transform humiliation and betrayal into concrete action and personal victory. For the first time in a long time, I felt that my life could have a just outcome, and that I could still feel proud of myself. Looking back today, I realize that that moment, that day I decided to transform pain into action, was the beginning of my true overcoming. I still carry parts of the pain and disappointment, but I also feel relief and strength. I learned that even when it seems like all is lost, it's possible to find clarity, courage, and purpose within yourself. That pain can be used as strength, and that it's possible to rise again, even when the world around you seems to conspire against you. Today, I know I've turned the page, and that despite everything, I can look back on my life with pride and hope.
How I faced betrayal and manipulation. That almost ended everything. You'll be surprised. I never imagined something like this could happen to me. I always thought my marriage with Raphael was strong, solid, built on love and respect. But one afternoon, I realized something was wrong. I felt a restlessness I couldn't quite explain, as if my instincts were trying to warn me of something. At first, I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just a bad phase, a passing phase. But little by little, my doubts began to grow, and I could no longer pretend everything was okay. I'm Bruna. I'm 32 years old, and on that hot October day, I discovered a truth that changed everything in my life. That's when I saw a strange movement in Raphael's account, a large transfer to someone I didn't know. My heart raced, fear took over, and I knew this was just the beginning of what was to come. I spent hours trying to process it. I didn't want to believe it, but everything pointed to betrayal, even if it wasn't. Exactly in the traditional way one imagines. Raphael was distant, too distant, and the transfer was just one more piece of evidence that something was wrong. I felt lost, alone, invaded. I loved that man, and I felt betrayed not only by the money but by the silence, the lies, the lack of consideration. The worst part was that the one on his side was Livia, my adoptive sister-in-law, his sister. I always thought we were a close family, but in that moment I realized it was all a facade. That sister I thought I could trust was destroying my life, trying to invade the space that was just mine and Raphael's. And he, whom I loved, didn't seem to care. That day, when I finally confronted Raphael, he tried to justify the transfer, saying it was to help his sister. The excuse was weak, and I knew it. He was trying to protect himself, but he was also leaving me unprotected. I felt anger, sadness, fear, the fear of losing everything, of being alone, of no longer knowing who to trust, the rage, of seeing someone I loved being manipulated by someone else. I felt like an intruder in my own home. It was the first time I realized how much Livia's manipulation was destroying my marriage. I wanted him to fight with me, to defend us, but he seemed trapped, confused, and that made me even more desperate. It wasn't easy to make the decision to act. I felt ashamed, afraid of others' judgment, afraid of exposing my private life to family, friends, the world. But the silence was worse. I couldn't continue living with that doubt, that anguish, that constant feeling of invasion. I decided to seek help, tell my closest friends, and seek a lawyer. I no longer wanted to be the woman who swallows everything silently, who pretends not to see to avoid causing a storm. I needed proof. I needed support to face not only Raphael, but also his entire family, who initially tried to portray me as the villain. But I couldn't give up what was rightfully mine: my peace, my marriage, my dignity. From that day on, everything changed. I began investigating, gathering evidence, protecting my space and my mind. I had to deal with threats, manipulation, and invasions of privacy. Livia didn't want me to find out, didn't want me to have control of the situation. But I was stronger than she imagined. Every step I took to rebuild my life was a victory over fear, shame, and pain. I felt heartbroken, but with each challenge, I grew stronger. The feeling of being alone was overwhelming, but I didn't let it paralyze me. It was my life, my story, and I decided to write a different ending. I decided that despite the betrayal, the pain, and the manipulation, I would rise above it. In the days that followed that decision, what struck me most was the silence in the house. Previously full of conversation and laughter, it became a place where I could only hear my own thoughts, and sometimes the sound of the door as he tried to close behind him. I felt a mixture of relief and anguish. Relief at having stopped pretending, at accepting what was hurting me, but also anguish at seeing that the man I loved was increasingly distant, trapped in a web he himself couldn't unravel. I no longer wanted to live in that comfortable lie, where Raphael hid from reality and Livia controlled everything. It was incredibly difficult to accept that they had more power over my feelings than I did. I felt invisible, betrayed, and at the same time compelled to be strong to keep from falling apart. It was as if every unspoken word, every blank look from him, was a knife in my chest. That's when I started seeking help outside of home. My friends were my safe haven. They listened to my outbursts without judgment, helped me put the pieces together, encouraged me to fight, to not give up. With them, I learned that my pain didn't define me, that I could emerge from that situation and build something new. I didn't need to hide behind fear or shame. I needed to be the protagonist of my own story. I also began to understand that Livia's betrayal wasn't just against me. It was a silent destruction of Raphael, who was trapped in a toxic and manipulative relationship. This didn't justify anything, but it helped me see the bigger picture and not lose compassion for him, even with everything that happened. My fight wasn't just against them. It was for myself, for my respect, and for my peace. During this process, I had to face much more than I imagined. His family, especially his parents, didn't support me at Wend. First, they tried to justify Livia, minimize her actions, and treated me as if I were to blame for the whole mess. It was a hard blow to my self-esteem. I felt isolated, unprotected, as if I were fighting alone against a huge wall. But the truth is that, over time, the evidence I gathered began to open everyone's eyes. His parents saw that their adopted daughter was crossing boundaries that could no longer be ignored, that the manipulations and invasions weren't just in my head, they changed. Their tune started supporting me, and, more importantly, protecting my marriage and my integrity. This was crucial for me not to give up, knowing that, even if it was little by little, I had allies. The hardest battle was dealing with Livia's manipulation. She didn't want to lose control. She tried to mess with my head, threatening me with things she knew would deeply affect me. She tried to make me feel guilty, making me question everything I felt. I had to learn to close my ears to these lies, to trust my perception and what I knew to be real. It wasn't easy. Many nights I cried alone, feeling like I was being attacked from all sides. But little by little, I became stronger. I understood that those who try to bring you down are those who are afraid of your strength, that trying to control your life is a way of admitting they have no power over you. And there, in that moment, I decided I would stay strong, no matter what. The turning point came when I was able to take everything to court. Bringing the screenshots, the messages, the documents, the evidence of financial fraud, the invasions of privacy. Seeing that everything I felt and suffered had a name, a consequence, was liberating. I was saying enough, making it clear that I would no longer accept being passed over, that I would no longer allow my dignity to be trampled upon. And in that court, I felt more alive than ever. It was the first day in a long time that I looked in the mirror and recognized the strong woman who was there, willing to fight for herself. From that moment on, nothing was the same. The process was long, painful, but necessary. I wasn't alone in my defense. I was for all the women who have experienced such betrayal, for everyone who has had to face manipulation in the name of love. After that day in court, I began to feel a different strength growing within me. It wasn't magic. It wasn't a sudden burst. It was a slow process, full of ups and downs. I still felt that mix of pain, anger, fear, and shame, but I also felt a clarity I hadn't felt before. I understood that I wasn't a helpless victim, that I could fight for what was mine, and that I didn't need to hide. Raphael didn't deserve my silence, nor my hidden sadness. I needed to reconnect with myself, with my values, and with my inner strength. I began taking small actions that, together, gave me a sense of control I hadn't felt in a long time. I went for walks, went to places I liked, and started taking better care of, myself, as if I were telling my body and mind that I deserved to be happy. Rebuilding didn't happen overnight. I had to learn to deal with the memories, with what I'd experienced and what I'd lost. Sometimes, I'd find myself looking at old photos, remembering good times, and wondering how it had ended that way. The pain of realizing that someone you love can do so much harm is a pain that can't be explained. But instead of wallowing in it, I used it as fuel to avoid repeating the same mistakes. I needed to take care of myself so that no one could invade my space again. It was a process that required a lot of therapy, a lot of self-talk, a lot of patience. I wasn't in a rush. I knew I needed to give it time, but I couldn't let it be just for healing. It needed to be for strengthening me too. The support of my friends and family was crucial during this time. I knew I didn't have to carry that cross alone. With them, I could laugh again, have fun, go out, and feel that my life could have moments of lightness, even if only for a short time. These small escapes from the pain were like respites, and I needed them to stay strong. I also began to realize that, despite the betrayal, I could still trust the right people, that there were still good people in the world, and that made all the difference. I was learning that life goes on, that love can exist in other forms, even self-love. This discovery was perhaps the greatest gift I received from everything I experienced. During this time, I realized I didn't need to carry resentment to move forward. It wasn't easy. I still feel angry sometimes, still sad, but resentment only consumed me and distanced me from my peace. So I started working on empathy, understanding that Raphael was also a victim of a toxic relationship with his sister. that he was manipulated and also lost his way. This didn't erase what he did, nor did it take away my pain, but it helped me move forward without carrying an even heavier burden. I needed to take care of myself, and that meant forgiving, not for the other person, but for myself. Realizing this was liberating. Today, I'm still on this path, but I feel that each step makes me lighter, stronger, more myself. The feeling I'm left with is that, even in the midst of chaos, it's possible to find oneself. That even when it seems like everything is falling apart, there's still a strength within us capable of rebuilding each broken piece. I know my story isn't unique, but it's mine, and it's with it that I carry on. Scars and all, but alive, strong, and ready for whatever comes. I still have fears, doubts, and insecurities, but I'm no longer ashamed to admit it. What I went through taught me to be human, imperfect, and resilient. And above all, it taught me that, despite the pain, it's possible to overcome and rebuild your life. You just have to take the first step, and I did. When I began to look back at that day when everything blew up in my face, I realized how much I had changed. I was no longer the same person who stood there, confused and broken in the midst of that storm. What felt like an end was actually a beginning. The beginning of putting myself first, of establishing my boundaries, and of learning to trust myself again. In that defining moment, I realized I could no longer live in the shadow of betrayal and manipulation. The decision to act was what saved me, even though I still felt a heavy mix of pain and hope. I wished that story had ended differently, but I couldn't control other people's choices, only my own. One of the hardest steps was accepting that Raphael wasn't ready to join me on this journey of rebuilding. As much as I still loved him, I had to understand that some people can't face their own ghosts, and that this didn't make me any less worthy of love and respect. This acceptance hurt more than any betrayal, because it meant giving up a dream I'd built together with him. It was then that I understood that my worth didn't depend on his presence or support. I needed to learn to love myself alone, to be whole without needing anyone else to complete my story. This doesn't mean I didn't want a family or love, but that I first needed to be whole to be able to build something healthy. My relationship with his family also changed significantly. After all the chaos, they distanced themselves from Livia and began to truly support me. This was a huge relief, because at that moment I felt isolated and judged. Seeing that Raphael's parents, who had previously tried to justify their adopted daughter's behavior, were able to see the truth and reach out to me made a huge difference. It was confirmation that I wasn't crazy, that my instincts weren't wrong, and that there were people who believed in my struggle. It wasn't an easy path. There were many arguments, hurt feelings, and mistrust, but the truth spoke louder. This support was one of the pillars that sustained me when it seemed like everything was falling apart. Still, the biggest challenge was rebuilding my self-confidence. I spent a lot of time doubting my perception, thinking I was overreacting, or that I was responsible for what was happening. Livia's manipulation was so subtle and persistent that it almost made me lose track of what was real. Regaining my mental and emotional clarity was a daily struggle. I had to learn to trust what I felt, to prioritize myself, to stand up for myself without fear. Little by little, this strength grew, and I came to understand that confidence isn't something you regain overnight, but rather that it can be rebuilt with patience, care, and a lot of courage. Today, looking back on everything I've experienced, I feel a mixture of sadness for what was lost, but also pride for everything I've achieved. I know I still have many battles ahead, that some wounds will take time to heal, but the most important thing is that I'm no longer a hostage to that situation. I've found a path, to my own freedom, to my own peace. And that's what keeps me going every day. I've learned that overcoming pain isn't the absence of pain, but the ability to move forward despite it. And I continue, with my scars, with renewed strength, and with the certainty that I'm capable of starting over as many times as necessary. There are still days when the pain hits hard, I won't lie. Sometimes I find myself reliving those conversations, the lies, the feeling of invasion. But over time, I've learned to deal with it differently. I no longer let the past consume me, but instead, I use those memories to strengthen me and not repeat the same mistakes. It's as if each painful memory has become a brick in the construction of my new life. Today, when I look back, I see that all of that, as bad as it was, taught me to be stronger, more attentive, and more in control of myself. It's a wound that still exists, but it no longer bleeds like it used to. I know that the journey of overcoming has no set, and that it's made up of cycles, and that some moments are more difficult than others. But I feel prepared to face them now. I'm aware of my worth and know that I deserve respect and true love. I've learned not to be afraid to ask for help, to lean on the people who care about me, and to not accept less than I deserve. My marriage is over, and it hurts to admit it, but I've understood that I can't build anything healthy with someone who doesn't want to fight alongside me. Today, I respect myself enough to say no when something hurts me, and to choose to be with those who truly value me. What I hope most is that my story can help someone going through something similar. I know how difficult it is to feel betrayed, manipulated, and discredited, but I want you to know that there is a way out, that you don't have to accept this pain as fate. You don't have to stay silent. You don't have to carry guilt that isn't yours. Seeking help, trusting yourself, and taking action can be scary, but it's the path to rediscovering freedom and peace. Life is so much more than suffering in silence. It's possible to bounce back, even if you still have scars. And this is just the beginning of your new story. I'm still discovering myself in this new phase, learning to live alone, to take care of myself, and to love myself in a way I never had before. It's far from perfect, because I still have my insecurities and difficult days, but I'm proud of every step I've taken to get here. I know my strength didn't come from a magical place. It came from my desire to not let the pain destroy me, the desire to be happy again, even if in a different form, without that person I once thought would be forever. And it's this desire that I cling to, because it's what keeps me going. If I could tell myself one thing that day, it would be to not be afraid, to trust my own instincts more, and to believe that, even when everything seems lost, we can rebuild. We can be stronger than any betrayal, any manipulation, or any unsupportive family. I am living proof of this. And even though the wound still exists, today I choose to take care of myself, respect myself, and move forward. Because I deserve it. Because my life is worth much more than any suffering. And this is my truth, my victory, and my hope.
How I manipulated my family and almost destroyed everything before discovering the hidden truth. I don't really know why I decided to write this today. Maybe because I'm tired of pretending the past is behind me, when in reality, it still weighs heavily on me. Many people think that maturing is just about growing up, working and paying the bills, but for me, maturing was facing what I did to the people who loved me most. For a long time, I was the kind of son who believed the world revolved around me. If my mother said no, I found a way to make her look like the villain. If she cried, I pretended not to see. And worst of all, I liked it when she lost control, because it gave me power. It's hard to admit it now, but I was a manipulator, and I knew exactly what to do to get everyone on my side. I must have been about 15 when everything really started to go wrong. My mother, Eva, had remarried Rodrigo, a nice guy, but I hated the idea of sharing space with him and his children. I thought she'd cheated on me, so I started doing what I knew how, turning everyone against her. I used Rafael, my father, to do this. He gave me everything I asked for, and in return, I'd badmouth my mother, make up stories about her treating me badly. He believed it, or pretended to believe it, because it fed his ego too. It was a dirty game, and I played it well. I remember one time she took my phone away because I'd lied about my grades. That same day, I called my dad crying, saying she was humiliating me and that Rodrigo was yelling at me. My dad showed up at her door in the middle of the afternoon and made a scene. And I, from inside my room, feigned fear. The neighbors heard everything. In the end, she gave it back just to avoid more trouble. And I smiled inside. That was what I wanted, to see her lose control, feel guilty, question herself. Every time I managed to manipulate her, it was like winning a trophy. I felt in control. Over time, everyone in the family took sides. My grandmother, Helena, thought my mother was too hard on me. My Aunt Clara said I just needed understanding. I took advantage of this. I played with words, with the faces I made, with the role of the wronged son. Rodrigo withdrew further and further, seeing there was no point in trying. Mateus and Sophia hated me, and rightly so. I made a point of provoking, of creating intrigue. It was chaos, and I was the center of it. Today, I look back and see that no one there had peace. Not even me, deep down. But the day that changed everything was a Sunday. It was my mother's birthday. She had prepared a big lunch, invited everyone. Even my father showed up, something she hadn't even expected. And I, in the midst of that chaos, decided to cause another stir. I said some horrible things to her in front of everyone. I told her she'd never been a real mother, that Rodrigo was a burden, that she'd destroyed my childhood. I remember her face freezing, as if time had stopped. She didn't respond. She just left the table, went to her room, and locked the door. It was the first time she hadn't reacted, and that's when it all started to sink in. That day, after she locked the door, the mood in the house died. No one said anything. Rodrigo tried to hide it, but I could tell he was angry. Helena stood by me, saying I was just venting. And Rafael, my father, had that smirk on his face, pleased to see the damage. But for the first time, I didn't feel a sense of victory. I remember going to my room, lying on the bed, and feeling a huge void. I can't explain what it was. Maybe because deep down, I realized I'd overstepped my bounds. But even so, I continued to pretend I didn't care. At dinner, she didn't show up. The cake sat there untouched, and that silence affected me more than any scream she ever uttered. The next day when I woke up, the house felt strange. Sophia gave me a strange look, and Mateus didn't even speak to me. Rodrigo left early, and my mum wasn't home. I thought she'd gone to work, but she still hadn't returned that afternoon. I called and her phone was off. It was the first time I felt truly afraid. I spent the day pacing, trying to hide my worry. That night, Rodrigo arrived and told me she'd gone to my grandparents' house. I said, "Great," feigning indifference, but inside, I was shattered. For the first time, she'd left me speechless. In the following days, she didn't return. Rodrigo tried to maintain his routine, but the house, it felt empty. I slept poorly and felt lost. I tried to reach her a few times, sent messages, but she didn't respond. I considered going over, but my pride wouldn't let me. So I started doing what I always did, looking for Rafael. I went to his house and told him she had abandoned me. He was completely right, saying that's what I got for defending her. But for the first time, those words didn't comfort me. I realized he didn't really care about me. He just wanted to win her over. And I began to understand that perhaps I had been a tool in this game. A week later, she showed up. She came home silent, with an expression I'd never seen before. It wasn't anger, it was exhaustion. She looked at me and simply said, "Lucas, I can't take it anymore." It was like a punch. She said she was going to stay at my grandparents' house for a while, that she needed some distance. She said she loved me, but that she couldn't go on like this. I tried to argue, cry, apologize, but she seemed on another plane. That's when I realized the extent of the damage. I always thought I had control, but that day I realized that control had destroyed me. After she left, everything fell apart. Rodrigo distanced himself from me completely. Mateus and Sophia barely spoke to me. The house felt cold, empty, lifeless, and I began to understand what loneliness truly was. Not the kind you feel when you're alone in your room, but the kind that comes when you realize you've pushed away everyone who loved you. I even began to miss her scoldings, the arguments, the lectures. I would trade any freedom for another family dinner, but it was too late. And I still had to learn to deal with the weight of my own choices. The following days were a kind of silent punishment. I'd wake up, go to school, come back and barely speak to Rodrigo. He tried to be polite, but I could see in his eyes how tired he was of me. Sometimes he'd try to make conversation, but I'd cut him off, and over time, he stopped trying. Mateus ignored me completely. Sophia looked at me with pity. I became the burden of the house, the ghost of a boy who only knew how to cause trouble. People still thought I was the poor guy from the breakup, but inside the house, I knew the truth. I was the reason everyone was drifting apart. I'd turned love into war, and the worst part was no one needed to punish me. I was doing it myself, constantly. One day, I went to school and realized that no one there knew what I was going through. Everyone thought I had a perfect life, a new cell phone, a father who gave everything, a present mother. And I wanted to scream that none of it made sense, that the cell phone, the sneakers, the things I used to feel important, now meant nothing. I had lost something much bigger, and this feeling began to consume me. That's when I decided to write a letter to my mother. It was the first time I tried to be honest with someone. I wrote everything I never had the courage to say, that I lied, that I made up stories, that I used her to hurt others, that I regret every word I said to hurt her. It took me about 3 days to work up the courage to deliver it. When I finally went to my grandparents' house, she greeted me at the door. She seemed surprised, but not hostile. I was trembling all over. I handed her the letter and said, "Just read it when I'm gone." She nodded, saying nothing. I left with my heart racing, thinking she might never speak to me again. But that night, she sent me a message, a short one. "Thank you, son. I read everything. I made a mistake too." I cried. I cried like a child. It was as if the weight I was carrying began to crack a little. It didn't disappear, but it cracked enough for me to breathe again. After that, things didn't go back to normal overnight. She still kept her distance, and I understood. I had no right to demand anything, so I slowly began to change. I stopped using Raphael as a shield. I started refusing his gifts. When he asked me if I needed anything, I said no, and that angered him. For the first time, I saw the same emptiness in his face that I once saw in mine. He tried to blame my mother, but I didn't play along. I just said, "I don't want this anymore, Dad. I don't want to be that guy." And he didn't respond. I think that day he also realized he'd lost me. It took months of trying to rebuild things. Rodrigo still kept his distance, but little by little, our relationship became less tense. Sophia invited me to play video games one day. Mateus helped me with a school project. Small gestures, but for me, huge ones. I began to understand that rebuilding trust isn't about apologizing once and expecting everything to go back to the way it was. It's about showing every day that you understand the damage you caused and are trying to be different. Not out of guilt, but because you finally understand the value of what you lost. The hardest part was winning my mother back. At first, any contact was tense. She was still hurt, and I couldn't blame her. I'd spent years manipulating, making up stories, using any excuse to feel in control. Every word out of my mouth could be seen as an attempt to deceive her again. So I decided to be completely transparent. I told her where I was, what I was doing, even the things I'd previously hidden to manipulate her. It wasn't easy. I often felt ridiculous, vulnerable, and I wanted to give up. But I could no longer live in the void I'd created. I needed to reclaim the mother I'd lost to myself. One of the first things I did was talk to Rodrigo alone. I needed to face the stepfather I'd avoided so much. He looked at me with a mixture of distrust and hope. I told him everything, that I was an idiot, that I'd been unfair, that I manipulated everyone and everything, and that I wanted to change. He remained silent, just watching me. I believe that at that moment, he understood that my apologies weren't just words. I meant what I said. And slowly, he began to treat me differently. No longer with cold distance, but with a kind of cautious respect. That gave me the strength to carry on. I also began to realize how my manipulations silently affected my siblings. Sophia, always on social media, blocked me several times. I understood. I had abused her trust with little things, with hurtful jokes. Mateus, competitive and direct, ignored me, and this hurt more than any scolding I had ever received. So I began trying to understand their feelings. I didn't demand affection. I didn't expect immediate forgiveness. I just wanted them to see that I was trying to be a better person. And little by little, they began to respond. Not in the way I expected, but it was a sign of hope. Raphael, my father, was another battle. He kept trying to use me against my mother, offering gifts, striking up conversations, trying to put me at the center of the conflict. At first, it was tempting, but I finally realized that accepting him would only lead me back to the same cycle. I said no repeatedly, firmly, without lengthy explanations. He was irritated, but I felt a freedom I'd never felt before. For the first time, I realized my choices were my own, and no longer tools for anyone's manipulation. This gave me the courage to deal with any future tension. The real turning point for me came one afternoon when I was alone with my mother. We sat on the couch, and I told her everything I felt, all the times I'd hurt her, everything I'd made up. She looked at me for a long time and simply said, "Lucas, I always knew you had a good heart. You just needed to find the right path." I cried, but this time they were tears of relief, not fear. For the first time in years, I felt like I could rebuild something real with her, that I was no longer that manipulative teenager, that I had a chance to be a better son, a brother, a better person. Looking back today, I realize how selfish I was. I spent years toying with the feelings of the people who loved me most, and only understood the damage when I nearly lost everything. The emptiness I felt that Sunday, when my mother left home and left me alone with my lies, was the shock I needed. The pain woke me up. It made me realize I no longer wanted to be someone capable of hurting the person who gave me everything. I learned that freedom without responsibility is prison, that power without empathy is destruction, and that manipulating to feel important only breeds loneliness. The process of change wasn't quick. I fell. Many times. I lied again, tried to manipulate small situations, tried to avoid responsibility. But each time I realized I was slipping back into the same pattern, I remembered my mother's look that day, her silence when she left me alone, and I felt ashamed. It reminded me that I had messed up things I had no right to mess up. It was slow, but each day I chose to act differently, to be honest, to listen and understand. Gave me more confidence in who I could be. Today, I can relate to my brothers, without competition or manipulation. With Rodrigo, I can talk without fear, without pretense. And with my mother, we can laugh, talk, and even argue, but in a way that builds rather than destroys. It's not perfect, and there are still times when old memories haunt me. But now I can acknowledge my mistakes, take responsibility, and act differently. Every gesture, every honest word has become a way to rebuild the trust I almost lost forever. I also learned that maturing doesn't mean forgetting the past. It means facing it, accepting that I made mistakes, feeling the pain I caused, and turning that into action. I can't erase what I did, but I can choose to act better every day. And this changed the way I see the world and myself. I still feel guilty sometimes. I still feel afraid of making the same mistake again. But this awareness helps me avoid repeating what nearly destroyed my family. It's a constant learning process, but it's worth every effort. If I could talk to 15-year-old Lucas, I'd say, "You're going to get screwed if you keep going like this, but there's a way out. It's hard, it hurts, and you'll feel alone. But it's possible to change, rebuild, and become someone who doesn't live to manipulate, but to truly love." Today, I know that being honest, owning up to mistakes, and striving to improve every day is what truly matters. I was able to turn things around, not because everything magically fell into place, but because I decided to face my mistakes head on. And that changed my life forever.
I faced lies, betrayals, and manipulations, and discovered something that changed everything forever. I woke up that day with the weight of years of family tension crushing me. My name is Elisa, I'm 22 years old, and I've always felt responsible for keeping everything in order, even when the world around me seemed to be falling apart. My father, Hugo, is a good man, but the loss of my mother made him overprotective, and he placed a responsibility on me that, at times, I didn't even know I could. Carrie. I had already learned to deal with the dramas of my sister Bruna, who always overreacted to every situation, and with Camilla, who tried to maintain her composure but also felt pressured. But that day, everything seemed to explode at once. Regina, my absent and manipulative mother, appeared out of nowhere, with accusations and blackmail that only increased my anxiety. I felt fear, anger, and a shame that burned inside, as if I were to blame for everything that was happening. The hardest part was feeling like I had to protect my father and my sisters, and still deal with my feelings, without losing my sanity. I looked in the mirror and saw someone tired but determined. That day, I realized that I could no longer remain silent, that I needed to find a strength that I didn't even know existed within me. The most critical moment began when my cousin Daniela decided to add fuel to the fire by unfairly accusing Sam, my loyal friend, of things he would never do. Sam, who had always been by my side, suddenly seemed small in the face of the cruelty and lies of people who should have cared about him. My heart raced, anger surged, and I felt powerless. I cried in secret, unable to show weakness in front of Hugo, who was already carrying so much weight. The feeling of injustice was overwhelming. I wanted to scream for all to hear that Sam didn't deserve this, but I also needed to keep a cool head, thinking of the whole family. What kept me going was realizing that, despite the chaos, there was something no one could touch. My love for my family and the certainty that I couldn't allow toxicity to destroy the little peace we still had. Anger mixed with fear turned to clarity. For the first time, I felt that if I wanted to protect those I loved, I needed to set firm boundaries, even if it meant confronting my mother and cousin. I remember that day, while I was taking care of the small things around the house and trying to calm my sisters, I felt a physical and emotional exhaustion that seemed overwhelming. Hugo was tense. Rita, our supporter, was trying to keep us together, but I could feel her struggle, as if she were also overwhelmed. It was then that Mateus, my fiancé, arrived, calmly trying to reassure me. He held my hand, and without many words, made me realize I wasn't alone. It was at that moment that I began to understand that my strength didn't have to be solitary. I could fight without carrying everything on my shoulders. I could allow others to help. This thought gave me a strange relief, a hope I hadn't felt in years. I began to realize that protecting my family didn't just mean silently enduring everything. It meant taking action, setting boundaries, and most importantly, taking care of myself too. Feeling this, even though I was afraid, was the turning point. For the first time, it wasn't just about surviving. It was about starting to rebuild our lives and making room for the love and peace we deserved. At the height of the conflict, when Regina began trying to manipulate Bruna and Camilla against me, I felt a mixture of desperation and determination. I could feel her every word trying to hurt me, but I also felt something growing inside me. The certainty that I would no longer be held hostage by the actions of those who only brought me pain. I remained silent for a few minutes, breathing deeply, looking at Sam, Matthias, and Rita, realizing that they were all genuinely there for me. The feeling of not being alone was transformative. For the first time, I realized that, despite all the toxicity around me, there was true affection that could not be destroyed. I began to allow myself to feel anger and fear, but also to use these emotions as fuel. It wasn't easy. Every word Regina said cut deep, but my awareness that I needed to protect what truly mattered kept me strong. I felt that in that moment, my life would change. I would no longer be held hostage by manipulation, nor would I allow myself to be consumed by old resentments. The clarity that came was harsh but liberating. I needed to take action, set boundaries, and not blame myself for putting family first. As the day began to darken, I felt a huge weight lift from my shoulders. Not because the problems had disappeared, but because I finally had the courage to face them. I felt more alive than ever, a mixture of extreme exhaustion and genuine hope. Sam was by my side, Matthias holding my hand, Rita smiling comfortingly, and Hugo, finally, breathing a little easier. The feeling of strength that grew within me was incredible. It wasn't about controlling everything, but about protecting what was important and allowing love and unity to overcome manipulation and pain. Looking at Sophia, the little newcomer who brought so much light, I realized it was worth the fight. There, that day, I understood that overcoming begins when you decide to no longer be a hostage. when you decide to face the chaos with clarity and courage, and when you allow yourself to feel supported without guilt. The fear was still there, the pain too, but now there was something greater. The certainty that we could rebuild our family and our lives, step by step. When I woke up the next day, I realized something had shifted within me. The feeling of fear was still there, but now it was accompanied by a clarity I'd never felt before. I remembered everything that had happened the day before and felt a mix of exhaustion and strength, as if each tear had been a step toward emotional freedom. Hugo was still apprehensive, and I could see in his eyes the concern of someone who feels they've lost control of their family, but also the beginning of confidence. I knew my firm stance the day before had changed something. Bruna still complained about everything, dramatizing situations as usual, but I began to realize I didn't need to get involved in every crisis to maintain peace. Camilla looked at me with a mixture of relief and silent admiration, and that made me feel like I was on the right path. The most important thing was that Sam and Matthias were standing firm by my side, reminding me that I didn't have to face the storm alone. That afternoon, while I was caring for Sophia, I felt a moment of absolute silence that seemed to give me permission to breathe. The little one nestled in my arms, completely trusting me, and I felt a new responsibility, unlike anything I had ever felt before. It wasn't just about protecting my family from outside manipulation, but about creating a safe space for love and unity. It was in that moment that I understood that my strength wasn't just about resistance. It was about building something worthwhile. Every gesture I made, every firm word I'd spoken the day before now made sense. I felt proud of myself, something I hadn't felt in a long time. The fear was still there, but it was no longer paralyzing. There was room for hope, for resilience. This clarity gave me the strength to face what was yet to come, knowing that, even in the face of Regina and Daniela, I could maintain my balance. Late in the afternoon, Hugo and Rita were talking in the living room, and I could hear parts of their conversation. Hugo seemed more relaxed, talking about trying to rebuild our life together, and Rita offered support with her characteristic calm. It was incredible to realize that even with all the pain, there were still people who wanted to protect and strengthen us. I felt immense gratitude and, for the first time in a long time, realized I didn't need to carry the entire family on my shoulders. This didn't mean I was weak, but rather that I finally understood that true strength doesn't come from suffering alone, but from sharing the burden with those who truly care. It was a moment of pure clarity. I felt myself breaking free from a seemingly endless cycle of fear and manipulation, and it brought a sense of relief that almost brought me to tears with emotion. As I prepared dinner, thinking about what might yet happen, I felt a quiet anger transform into determination. Regina might still try to interfere, and Daniela might continue spreading lies, but I knew I was ready to face these situations differently. No longer with fear or guilt, but with clear boundaries and firm protection for my family. I realized that despite all the tension, Sam and Matthias's presence, combined with Rita's calm and Hugo's love, created a safety net that allowed me to act without despair. I felt a strength I never imagined I had, a courage that only comes when you're tired of being manipulated and decide it's time to take control of your own life. When I finally sat down with Camilla and Bruna to talk, I felt a mix of nervousness and relief. I knew changing the family dynamics wouldn't be easy, but I had to try. I spoke directly, unapologetically setting boundaries, explaining that love for family also included protecting everyone from chaos. Camilla listened attentively, and even Bruna, who usually dramatizes, began to understand that it was no longer time to repeat the same patterns. This moment gave me a sense of silent victory, something I had never experienced before. I realized that my life could be better, despite the conflicts, and that I was beginning to build a healthier reality for all of us. For the first time, I felt the weight on my shoulders begin to lift, and hope became something tangible. That day, I felt something inside me shift forever. That morning, as I organized the house and cared for Sophia, I realized I could no longer allow myself to be paralyzed by fear. Regina still tried to manipulate everything from a distance, and Daniela continued her accusations, but for the first time, I felt I had the emotional tools to deal with it. Every small action, every firm decision I'd made the day before, began to solidify as a turning point. I felt tired, of course, but also a strength that surprised me. I realized that protecting my family didn't mean controlling every detail, but rather acting clearly, maintaining boundaries and caring for what truly matters. As I looked at Sophia sleeping, I felt a deep determination that the love, the bond we were building, needed to be preserved at any cost. That afternoon, Hugo came to talk to me. He was visibly worried, but he also seemed more confident. I knew he trusted me, and this brought a new responsibility, but also a relief. For the first time, I felt I didn't have to carry everything alone, that being with people who truly care could strengthen us. Sam and Matthias were with me, and it completely changed my perspective. The fear was still there, but it was no longer overwhelming. I began to realize that, even in the face of my mother and cousin's manipulations, there was a solid foundation of love and loyalty that no one could break. This clarity gave me the courage to face not only external conflicts, but also my internal fears, which often prevented me from taking action. Later, when Bruna started complaining about something small, I felt a newfound patience blossom within me. Before, I would have reacted with anger or anxiety, but now I was able to take a deep breath and explain firmly and calmly. She wasn't pleased, of course, but something had changed. I was no longer at the mercy of other people's drama. Camilla, on the other hand, seemed lighter, as if she finally realized she didn't need to feel guilty for everything that was happening. It was a moment of clarity for me. We can't always change others, but we can change how we react and set boundaries. I felt proud of myself, a feeling I hadn't felt in a long time. For the first time, I began to believe it was possible to protect my family and still take care of myself, without feeling guilty or overwhelmed. By late afternoon, I felt a mix of exhaustion and relief. Every conflict we'd faced that day seemed smaller, because I now had clarity in how I dealt with it. Hugo and Rita were talking in the living room about reorganizing the family routine, and I realized there was finally room for love to overcome the chaos. Sam came to me, held my hand, and told me he was proud of my attitude. I felt tears well up, not of pain, but of immense relief. It was the first time I realized that, even with all the manipulation and accusations, there was a lighter reality we could build. Sophia, small and innocent, was there as a symbol of a new beginning, and I felt our family bond was genuinely strengthening. When night fell, I sat in Sophia's room and watched her sleep. I felt a deep gratitude and a renewed hope I hadn't known existed. The sense of relief was real, but it was also accompanied by an awareness. There were still challenges, but now I had the strength to face them. I felt empowered to say no when necessary, to protect those I loved without feeling guilty, to allow love and unity to overcome manipulation and drama. It was a moment of clarity and transformation. For the first time, I felt I no longer needed to live in constant fear, that I could slowly rebuild our family and my personal life in a healthy and safe way. The next day, I felt a different determination when I woke up. The tension hadn't disappeared, but my approach to dealing with it had completely changed. Regina continued to try to create conflict, and Daniela relentlessly spread accusations that hurt Sam, but something inside me remained firm. I realized my strength didn't come from silently enduring everything, but from acting clearly and setting boundaries. Every breath I took was accompanied by a knowingness. I didn't need to be held hostage by those who only wanted to see us suffer. Hugo was still worried, but the confidence in my steps was already beginning to rub off on him. Seeing Sam, Matthias, and Rita supporting me brought an unprecedented sense of relief and courage. For the first time, I felt I wasn't alone in a cycle that had previously seemed endless. That afternoon, while organizing Sophia's room, I felt a moment of silence that seemed to give me space to think. I held the little one in my arms and realized that the responsibility I felt wasn't just about protection, but about creating a safe environment for love to flourish. Tears came, not of despair, but of relief. The feeling of finally being able to act with clarity gave me strength. Before, every act of manipulation and deception had left me paralyzed, but now I saw that I could respond directly and firmly without losing myself emotionally. Sam and Matthias's presence was essential, reminding me that genuine support exists and can be a source of real strength. Later, when Bruna began to dramatize something small, I felt patience grow within me. Instead of getting angry, I took a deep breath and calmly but firmly explained the boundaries we all needed to respect. Camilla looked at me with silent admiration, and this reinforced that I was on the right track. I felt a mixture of pride and relief, as if I had achieved something that had long seemed impossible, remaining calm and protecting my family at the same time. I realized that, although manipulation still existed, there was now clarity and firmness in my actions, and this gave me a sense of control I had never experienced before. Late in the afternoon, Hugo came to me, visibly more relaxed. He talked about trying to reorganize the family's life together with Rita, and I felt immense gratitude at realizing I didn't have to carry everything alone. Sam held my hand, and Matthias gave me a hug, conveying confidence. For the first time in a long time, I felt like we were building something solid, even though the conflict still lingered. The clarity that grew within me allowed me to realize that love and unity can overcome manipulation and pain, and that protecting those we love doesn't have to mean constant suffering. As night fell, I sat with Sophia on my lap and felt a quiet peace invade my body. The feeling of relief was intense, but also realistic. Challenges would still exist, but now I knew I had the strength and support to face them. For the first time, I felt that overcoming wasn't just about surviving, but about rebuilding our lives, step by step, with clear boundaries, genuine love, and the courage to face whatever was necessary. I felt hope, strength, and resilience grow within me, something I hadn't felt in a long time. The next day, I realized something inside me had shifted forever. The feeling of fear was still there, but it was no longer paralyzing. Now it was accompanied by clarity and determination. Regina continued to try to interfere. Daniela continued to spread accusations, but I knew I was ready. For the first time, I felt like my decisions truly mattered, and that protecting my family didn't have to consume me completely. Hugo looked at me with a mixture of pride and relief, and I realized our relationship had strengthened. Sam and Matthias remained by my side, steadfast, reminding me that true strength is shared. It was a moment of silent recognition. Even amidst the pain, there was room for hope, support, and rebuilding. As I cared for Sophia that day, I felt something incredible. Fear had given way to a sense of purpose. Every loving gesture, every care for the little one, represented more than protection. It was an affirmation that our family could be healthy and happy, even after so much conflict. The tears came, but they weren't of pain. They were of relief, gratitude, and strength. I realized I didn't have to carry everything alone. I could count on Hugo, Rita, Sam, Matthias, and even Camilla, who was beginning to stand up for herself more firmly. This support network gave me the courage to face Regina and Daniela when necessary, without feeling guilty or weak. For the first time, I felt like we were truly rebuilding our lives. Late that afternoon, talking to Bruna, I felt something unexpected. Even with all her drama, I managed to remain calm and firmly explain my limits. She wasn't happy, of course, but I began to realize I no longer needed to give in to all the manipulation. Camilla watched silently, and I felt proud of the three of us, even though I knew there were still challenges. This clarity about what was necessary to protect the family without losing oneself was liberating. For the first time, I felt I could act with both firmness and love. The chaos still existed, but it no longer dominated me. When night fell, I sat with Sophia on my lap, watching her. Peaceful sleep, and felt a peace I hadn't felt in years. The fear was still there, but it was no longer paralyzing. The pain was still there, but there was room for love and hope. Sam hugged me. Matthias held my hand, and Hugo smiled lightly, finally breathing lightly. I realized that overcoming grief doesn't mean forgetting the pain or conflicts, but rather finding the strength to act consciously, protect those we love, and rebuild our lives, even if slowly. For the first time, I felt we were on the right path together, strong and prepared to face whatever came. Now, looking back, I'm proud of myself and the family we managed to protect. I know there will still be challenges, but I've discovered something important. True strength isn't surviving in silence, but facing chaos with clarity, setting boundaries, and allowing love and unity to prevail. Today, I feel hope, resilience, and courage. I feel I can protect and love without losing myself, that I can rebuild our history and create a future where true affection overcomes manipulation. That day marked my transformation, the point at which I realized that even in the midst of pain, it is possible to find strength, clarity, and hope. No one would believe that my childhood friend tried to destroy my life, but the truth won. I never imagined I'd be here one day, writing on a personal growth forum, trying to put into words one of the hardest moments of my life. I'm not one to talk about myself much, but that day changed everything. So I think I need to tell you. I'm Rosangela, I'm 34, a doctor, and I've always believed my work, my ethics, and my story would speak for me. But on that particular day, I discovered what it's like to Have your life turned upside down by someone you once trusted? Rachel, my childhood friend, the one I grew up with, the one who slept at my house, the one who knew my pain and my secrets. I never thought she could use all that against me. But she did. In a way that sounded like a soap opera, but it was real life, raw, dirty. It all started with small gossip, strange comments that reached me. I thought it was an exaggeration, that I was paranoid. But that day, when I saw the fake messages circulating with my name, it was as if the ground had been ripped out from under my feet. It was lie after lie, spread with a precision that only someone who knew me well could achieve. I was in the hospital, in the middle of my shift, when chaos began. My phone wouldn't stop vibrating, messages from colleagues, patients, people I barely knew. I opened the notifications and found a string of fake screenshots, absurd accusations, fabricated stories with personal details only someone close to me would know. They said I'd committed medical errors, that I'd cheated on my boyfriend Kaio, that I was involved in fraud schemes. All lies, but well-constructed lies, with setup, dates, even witnesses that never existed. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. I ran to the hospital bathroom, locked the door, and broke down. I cried in a way I hadn't cried since I was a child. I cried out of despair, sobbing, with the feeling that my life was over. I looked at myself in the mirror, eyes red, makeup smeared, and felt small, helpless, dirty. I wanted to disappear. I wanted it all to stop. Kaio, my boyfriend, was the first person to realize something was wrong. He called me as soon as people started tagging him in their posts too. When I heard his voice on the phone, I broke down again. I tried to explain, but I was confused, unsure where to begin. He didn't doubt me for a second, and that held me together. He told me to breathe, not to delete anything, to keep everything as evidence. He said we would prove the truth, that it was a crime. At the time, I couldn't even think about justice. I just wanted the pain to stop. I spent days without sleep, without eating properly, going to work like a zombie. The looks from my colleagues at the hospital killed me inside. I felt ashamed, even though I was a victim. And I think that was one of the worst parts, the feeling of being dirty for something I didn't do. That day, I decided to go to my parents' house. I needed a safe place, a hug that would remind me I was still human. I sat at the kitchen table with my mother, Marlene, looking at me with that look of someone who feels everything right along with you, even without saying anything. My father, Renato, was silent for a while until he asked if I had any idea who was behind it. I hesitated, but deep down, I already knew. It was Rachel. I recognized her writing style, her expressions, the details she used. My mother tried to convince me not to react, to let it go, to avoid more pain. But Kaio wouldn't let me. He said that if I kept quiet, she would continue. And it was there, that night, amid tears, fear, and anger, that I realized that either I reacted or she would destroy me forever. The next day, still shaking, I went to work. I tried to act normal, but even the sound of conversations in the hospital hallway hurt. That's when Dr. Klein, my colleague, called me in to talk. He'd seen everything online and told me he knew a lawyer who specialized in harassment and digital defamation. At the time, I thought, this is too big for me. But he looked me in the eye and said, "Rosangela, you're a doctor. You save lives. Now it's yours that needs saving." Those words shocked me. For the first time since it all began, I felt a spark of strength within me. Still scared, still shaking, but that was when my process of fighting back began. The first thing I did after talking to Dr. Klein was take a deep breath and accept that I needed professional help. Until that day, I thought I could handle it on my own, that if I kept quiet, it would pass. But it didn't. Every hour I spent without reacting meant another rumor, another false post, another person believing I was who they were saying I was. So I called the number Dr. Klein gave me and scheduled a meeting with the lawyer. I was shaking on the phone, my voice cracking, but she was firm and calm. She told me I had done the right thing by not deleting anything and that I needed to gather as much evidence as possible. That same day, Kaio and I started downloading everything. Screenshots, links, schedules, every detail. It was painful to see my name destroyed like that, but at the same time, it was then that I began to feel a bit of control returning to me. As I gathered evidence, my body reacted. I couldn't sleep well. Every new notification on my phone gave me butterflies. I was afraid to open it and see another lie. Even showering became difficult because my head wouldn't stop. Kaio stayed by my side, often sleeping on the couch so I wouldn't feel alone. My parents took turns caring for me and ensuring my safety. Even locking doors and windows became routine. I felt like a criminal, but I was a victim. And this is a detail only those who experience it understand. The feeling of being guilty without actually being guilty. The feeling of being ashamed of what you didn't do. It hurts more than anger. And at the same time, deep inside, a point of resistance was emerging. I started thinking, if I've survived this far, I won't let her win. The lawyer explained to me that I could file civil and criminal lawsuits, and that this wasn't just gossip, it was a crime. She advised me to file a police report and request removal of the content. I was shocked by the number of steps I had to follow, but she told me, "You're not alone. We'll do it together." And that gave me strength. Joseph, a friend who understands technology, joined the story too. He started helping me track the fake accounts, the IP addresses, the times. I remember the exact moment he found a connection between a fake profile and a number Rachel had used before. It was a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief because I was proving I wasn't crazy. Sadness because it confirmed it was really her. Meanwhile, Rachel wouldn't stop. She violated emergency court orders we'd obtained, invaded my privacy, and tried to access my hospital email. It was a silent but devastating war. Every time I thought I'd caught my breath, another wave hit. I felt anger, yes, but above all, a profound exhaustion. The kind of exhaustion that's not just physical, but mental and emotional. I'd wake up already exhausted, terrified of what I'd find on my phone, and yet I kept gathering evidence, because deep down, I knew this would be the only way to get my life back. The turning point, the moment I truly felt like I was no longer a passive victim, happened one afternoon at the lawyer's office. She showed me the entire dossier we'd put together. It was a huge folder, full of screenshots, reports, digital connections, and testimonies. She looked at me and said, "Rosangela, this is indisputable." I cried again, but this time it was different. It was a cry of anger mixed with hope. For the first time, I felt like maybe it was possible to turn things around. I was still hurt, still ashamed, still feeling judged. But in that moment, holding that folder, I thought, I'm going to beat this, even if it's the last thing I do. After that day at the office, something inside me changed. I was no longer the same scared woman who cried hidden in the bathroom. I was still afraid, of course, but it was a different kind of fear. The fear of fighting and losing. No longer the fear of being destroyed without fighting back. I started actively participating in everything, reading every line of the documents, asking questions, learning about laws I'd never heard of. I saw how cruel it is when someone uses the internet to hurt another person. It's as if the whole world can point the finger at you, even without knowing what happened. The lawyer told me the process would be long and that Rachel would probably try to manipulate everything to make herself look like a victim. And that's exactly what she did. Suddenly, posts started appearing saying I was stalking her, that I was jealous. Seeing it made me sick. But this time, I didn't cry. I just took a deep breath and kept going. Throughout the entire process, I had to endure hearings, depositions, and humiliating situations. Some people looked at me as if I were making it up. Once, leaving a hearing, I sat in the car and cried again. But this time, it was out of rage. I thought, how can someone destroy another person's life and still play the victim? I saw Rachel trying to cry in court, lying with a naturalness that scared me. But in that moment, seeing Kaio holding my hand kept me going. He looked at me and said softly, "Don't let go now, you're almost there." And I knew he was right. The lawyer told me this too, that those who tell the truth may take time, but they win. Joseph was crucial during this phase. He managed to prove the authorship of several fake profiles. The digital evidence was clear. The IP address was the same one used in Rachel's previous logins. Her defense tried to allege hacking, technical error, anything that would clear her of blame. But the evidence was too strong. Even so, each hearing was torture. I left drained, exhausted, feeling like with every word I relived it all. The shame, the fear, the feeling of being exposed. But at the same time, each step was a victory. Small, but real. I began to realize that I was no longer just a victim. I was becoming someone fighting for my own dignity. My family was my safe haven. My parents held me together in a way I can never thank them enough. My mother would lie awake at night, worried about what they might do to me. My father, even though he was, more reserved, was the one who gave me the most security. He would say, "Rosangela, no one destroys character with lies." And as simple as it was, that phrase stuck with me. I repeated it to myself when it seemed like everything was going to fall apart. Sometimes in the wee hours of the morning, I would stare at the ceiling and wonder if it would all ever end. I was afraid I would never find peace again, afraid that the internet would never forget. But somehow, each day, I felt a little stronger. The day Rachel broke the second court order was the hardest. She posted again, even after the judge ordered absolute silence. And it wasn't just provocation, it was cruel. She used an old photo of me with my mother and wrote disgusting things. I felt anger, disgust, downright hatred. I grabbed my phone, trembling, and sent everything to my lawyer. In less than an hour, we filed a new request, and the judge authorized more severe measures. In that moment, I realized she was self-destructing. The more she tried to hurt me, the more she revealed her true colors. I began to understand that winning wasn't just about proving myself right. It was about seeing the truth emerge, even if slowly. After that last violation, I began to understand that Rachel wouldn't stop because she couldn't deal with her own frustration. It was an obsession, an unhealthy need to see myself broken. I remember looking in the mirror one day and barely recognizing myself. Dark circles under my eyes, a tired body, an exhausted mind. I was no longer the smiling doctor patients saw in the office. I was on automatic. But something inside me told me I couldn't deliver what she wanted. She wanted to see me broken, and I wasn't going to give her that. So I started doing little things for myself. I went back to therapy, started running in the mornings again, turned off my phone at night. I needed to remember who I was outside of that pain. And it was incredible to realize that, even hurt, I still existed. That I could still feel peace for moments, even when the chaos was outside. It was around this time that Emily, Rachel's younger sister, contacted me. I almost couldn't believe it when I saw her name on the screen. She asked to meet me in person. I confess I trembled with fear, thinking it was some kind of trap, but I accepted. We met at a discreet cafe. She was nervous, and the first words she said were, "I'm sorry for everything my sister did to you." I remained silent. Emily told me that Rachel had always harbored a kind of envy disguised as admiration, that since childhood, she'd tried to compete with me in everything. Hearing that was strange, because I'd never seen Rachel like that. I'd only seen her friend. But the pieces started to fall into place. Emily also said that her sister was out of control, that she couldn't accept losing control of situations. That scared me, but it also gave me a sense of clarity I hadn't had before. After that conversation with Emily, I began to see everything from a different perspective. Rachel wasn't just bad, she was sick. That didn't justify what she did, but it explained the extent of what I was facing. The lawyer advised me not to have direct contact with her, but I confess that at times I considered confronting her. I wanted to look her in the eye and ask why, but I knew it wouldn't work. So I channeled that desire into something else, taking care of myself and moving forward with the process. And that's when I realized how much the right support changes everything. Kaio, Joseph, my parents, even my coworkers began treating me with more empathy when they understood what was happening. The suspicious silence gave way to looks of respect. I began to breathe easier. The following hearings were easier for me. I no longer cried when I heard her name. I spoke firmly, showed the evidence, and answered confidently. The lawyer even commented that I seemed like a different person. And I really was. It wasn't that the pain had gone away. It had just shifted. I no longer carried the shame, just the desire to end it all. When the judge handed down the first favorable ruling, acknowledging the defamation and online harassment, I cried, but not from sadness. It was a pure cry of relief, of someone who survived the hurricane. I remember leaving the room and hugging Kaio. He simply said, "I told you you would win." And I replied, "I haven't won yet, but now I know I will." The final victory came months later, with the full sentence. Rachel was convicted of defamation, invasion of privacy, and failure to comply with court orders. When I read the document, my hands trembled. I stood still for a few minutes, staring at those words. It wasn't joy I felt. It was a quiet peace, as if I could finally breathe without fear. I didn't jump, I didn't scream, I didn't post anything. I just closed my laptop and went to the balcony. I sat and stared at the sky, remembering everything I'd experienced. It was there, in that silence, that I understood that winning wasn't about destroying the other, but about reclaiming myself. After the sentencing, life didn't instantly return to normal. I was still afraid of strange messages, judgmental looks, rumors. But the difference was that I finally had the tools and evidence to protect myself. I realized that strength isn't about not feeling fear, but about continuing despite it. I returned to work with more focus, more calm. Every patient who entered the office was a reminder that I could still save lives, even after nearly losing my own dignity. My parents remained by my side, and Kaio never stopped holding my hand in moments of insecurity. I began to understand that asking for help isn't weakness, it's intelligence. And that, even with all the pain Rachel caused me, I didn't have to carry the weight alone. I still remember the nights I'd stare at the ceiling, my entire body aching with emotional exhaustion. But those nights were fading. Each step taken, each court hearing won, each piece of evidence presented, gave me back pieces of myself I'd thought were lost. Joseph became almost like a brother, always helping me understand the digital pathways, the traces we left and the ones Rachel tried to erase. I learned to read the signs, to not trust appearances, but also to believe in what I could control. And this gave me a sense of power I'd never felt before. It wasn't power over her, it was power over my own life. Looking back is strange. I still feel angry sometimes, especially when I remember her audacity in attacking me with such lies and precision. But anger now fuels me, not paralyzes me. I know that nothing she did erases who I am. And most importantly, I learned that life isn't fair, but justice exists, even if it takes time. Today, when someone asks me about that period, I tell them the truth. It hurts, it's tiring, it makes me cry. But it also teaches me. It teaches me to have boundaries, to value true support, to be resilient. I've become a version of myself that doesn't give in easily, that protects those I love, and that knows I don't need to cower in the face of other people's cruelty. I know the wound will never completely disappear. I'll remember Rachel, the lies, the humiliations, but today I clearly remember how I resisted, how I managed to transform fear into strategy, pain into focus, tears into action, and that's something no one can take away from me. With each step, I rebuilt my life, my work, my reputation. With each small victory, I felt like I was back in control. I didn't become perfect, but I became stronger, more aware, and better prepared to face life. Today, I write this because I know someone, somewhere, may be going through something similar. I want you to know that it's possible to overcome, even when it seems like everything is falling apart. My story isn't a fairy tale or a movie. It's about real people, with fear, shame, anger, exhaustion, and pain. But it's also about people who found strength within themselves, support from the right people, and the clarity to react. If you're in the middle of the hurricane, don't give up. Breathe, seek help, organize your evidence, trust those who are by your side, and don't blame yourself for what you didn't do. It's possible to rebuild, even with scars. And when the truth finally comes out, the weight you carried will transform into freedom.
I discovered my wife was cheating and humiliating me. What happened next will surprise you. I don't even know how to begin writing this, but I need to get it out before it explodes. It feels like it all happened yesterday. My name is Marcio. I'm 38 years old, and I'm a mechanic. I've always been a simple guy, never ashamed of my work. I built my workshop with my own hands, piece by piece, with a lot of effort. Each car I repaired was a brick in this life I always thought was solid. I woke up early, went to work, and came back tired, but happy to be building something for myself and my family. I believed that was enough, that all it took was love and hard work to earn respect. But what I experienced showed me that sometimes the world doesn't work that way. One day I noticed that Sarah, my wife, was different. Small comments, sidelong glances, clothes too new for our reality. At first I tried to ignore it. I thought it was a phase, stress, whatever. But the feeling of being judged in my own home grew. It's a pain that only those who have experienced it understand. It's not just jealousy, it's a kind of silent humiliation, the kind that makes you feel small in the place that should be your refuge. It was as if every smile she had was fake, as if she were looking at me and seeing a stranger. The final straw happened so mundanely that I still remember the smell of the moment. It was a hot afternoon. I'd just gotten back from the garage and went to get a glass of water. Her phone was on the table charging. A message vibrated, and I can't explain it. My hand was quicker than my reasoning. I opened it, and there it was. It wasn't just any message, it was an audio message. She was laughing, talking about her poor husband, saying she was going to get rid of me. And she wasn't alone in this conversation. It was with another man, Mark. Each word was like a knife stab. The kitchen seemed to spin. I felt heat rising in my face, my hands trembling. I sat on the floor, leaning against the wall, trying to understand if this was real. The world went silent for a moment, only that audio echoed inside my head. I read and reread the messages, listened to the audio messages again, as if trying to find a loophole, an excuse, anything that would make me believe it wasn't true. But it was. The woman sleeping next to me, who claimed to love me, was humiliating me behind my back, turning me into a laughing stock. I felt a shame I'd never felt in my life. It was as if I was smaller than a grain of sand. I sat there, I think, for hours. Time lost its meaning. It was a mixture of anger, sadness, despair, and a new feeling, uselessness. I asked myself 1,000 times where I had gone wrong. If I had been too stupid, too naive, if working so hard had made me miss out on something she needed. With each question, another wave of pain hit me. I staggered to my feet and went to the workshop, because it was the only place where I still felt like myself. I sat on the bench where I usually rested, looking at the tools, the cars, the oil-stained floor that had always been a source of pride. But in that moment, everything seemed meaningless. It was as if my entire life were a lie. I thought about screaming, breaking everything, but all I could do was cry. I had never cried like that, a heavy cry that comes from deep within the stomach. Then I realized I was at rock bottom, and yet something inside me, a shred of dignity, told me I couldn't stay there forever. It was a small spark, but it was mine. The next day, I woke up without having slept. My face was swollen, my body heavy. Sarah had already left. I didn't even know how to look at her. Every step inside the house felt strange, as if it were an unfamiliar place. But along with the despair came a clarity. I wouldn't accept being destroyed. I wouldn't let them strip me of the little dignity I had left. That's when I remembered a friend who had told me about Dr. Henrique, a lawyer known for being fair and straightforward. I picked up the phone with trembling hands and called. I told him everything, or at least I tried. My voice cracked. It sounded like I was confessing to a crime, when in fact I was the victim. He listened patiently and told me to come to his office that same day. That call was my first step. It seemed small, but it was huge. It was the first time I chose to act, not just react. Arriving at Dr. Henrique's office, I was still shaking. He greeted me calmly, looked me in the eye, and told me I needed to breathe. I explained every detail. I showed him the messages, the audio recordings, everything. He was direct. We needed to organize the evidence, show the truth. It wasn't just about winning a case, it was about regaining my dignity. When he said this, something inside me stirred. I'd spent the night feeling like crap, but there, listening to him speak, I began to feel a spark of hope. For the first time, I felt like maybe I wasn't the failure she'd led me to believe I was. I left that office still wounded, but with a plan. And at that moment, having a plan was all I needed. I left Dr. Henrique's office with the papers in my hands and my head spinning. It wasn't just a lawsuit, it was my life, my marriage, my name that were at stake. I got in my car and went straight to the shop, as if returning to a safe haven, but nothing felt the same. The smell of oil, the noise of the cars, everything was different. It was as if I were seeing my life from the outside, like a stranger. I sat on the reception bench for a while, staring at my greasy hands, hands that had built everything and yet were being ridiculed. I remembered the audio of her saying, "Poor husband," and it burned inside me. I wondered how anyone could sleep soundly after saying something like that about someone who only tried their best. But at the same time, I began to realize that the pain was turning into something else. It was as if I was transforming shame into anger, anger into energy. I had one goal now, to prove the truth. Not to her, not to Mark, but to myself. It was my dignity that was at stake. I knew the road would be long and difficult, but inside me a voice said, "You are not the trash," she said. And that voice, though small, began to grow. I started gathering everything, messages, audios, dates, times. I spent hours organizing every detail, printing conversations, saving files. It was painful work. Each screenshot I took was a new stab, a reminder that the woman I loved saw me as a hindrance, but it was necessary. Dr. Henrique explained to me that the trial would be difficult, that she might try to twist the story, play the victim, use everything against me. This possibility left me tense, my stomach churning. I couldn't sleep well, dreaming of her laughing at me in court, telling me I was making it all up. I woke up sweaty, nervous, but I kept going. Each night awake was another piece of my body struggling. I was tired, but for the first time, the tiredness had a meaning. It wasn't just working to pay the bills, it was working to reclaim who I was. And that gave me a strange strength, an energy I didn't even know I had. The worst part was pretending to be normal at home. Every time she arrived, every time she looked at me, I felt a knot in my stomach. She didn't know I'd already figured it all out. Sometimes she smiled, sometimes she complained, sometimes she acted as if nothing was happening. And there I was, silent, planning. It was a theater that consumed me. I thought about exploding, throwing everything in her face, but Dr. Henrique advised me to wait, not to show that I knew. It was to gather more evidence so that there would be no doubt in court. This wait was one of the most painful things in my life. Sleeping next to someone who stabbed you in the back is like sleeping with an enemy. Her scent, which once soothed me, now sickened me. Every gesture seemed false. Every word seemed rehearsed. I felt like a prisoner in my own home, counting the days until I could be free. Meanwhile, the shop became my refuge and my battlefield at the same time. I spent more time there than ever before. I worked late, not because I had more work, but because I couldn't stand being home. Every customer who came in was a temporary relief. Every car fixed was a way to prove to myself that I still had value. But inside, I was broken. I remember one specific day when a customer complimented my work and said, "You're an honest man. It's a pleasure to bring your car here." In that moment, I held back tears. It was a simple sentence, but it was like a reminder of who I really am. I'm not the trash she called me. I'm not the poor husband she ridiculed. I'm a man who built everything on his own, with sweat, without stepping on anyone. And I was going to use that truth to lift me up. When the day of the hearing finally arrived, I was a wreck inside. But outwardly, I tried to hold myself together. I put on my best shirt, the one I wore to my nephew's baptism, because I wanted to show myself respect. I walked into the courtroom, my legs shaking. My heart felt like it was about to burst out of my chest. Sarah was there, sitting next to her lawyer, and so was Mark, with that look of superiority. I looked at them and felt a mixture of anger and pity. It was as if I was seeing people I didn't know. Dr. Henrique played the audio for the judge to hear. With every word, with every laugh she'd made public, I felt my heart slowly rebuild. It wasn't pleasure. It wasn't revenge. It was as if, finally, the truth was breathing. The feeling of hearing everything revealed in court was surreal. Her every laugh, every cruel comment pounded in my head like a heavy drum. For a few seconds, I nearly fainted with relief and rage at the same time. No one needed to convince me that I had been humiliated. The whole world was watching. The judge, calm and firm, listened to everything, analyzing every detail. And even with the weight of shame, I felt a clarity I hadn't felt in months. The truth was on my side. This wasn't a tale of revenge, it was justice. And this gave me strength I hadn't known existed. I felt my chest open, as if I could finally breathe without fear. For the first time, I realized that the pain that consumed me could be transformed into something powerful, something that made me bigger, stronger. I looked at Dr. Henrique and saw confidence in his eyes, and that comforted me. He gave me security when I felt like everything could fall apart. When the judge began speaking, saying that all the evidence was clear, that the audio recordings left no doubt about her intentions, I felt a huge weight lift from my shoulders. For months, I'd carried shame, humiliation, and fear, and here it was all being acknowledged. Every tear I'd shed, every sleepless night, every time I'd sat alone in the workshop feeling useless, was worth it. The feeling of justice wasn't just moral, it was physical. I felt my shoulders relax, the knot in my stomach disappear, a kind of relief I hadn't felt since the day I discovered the betrayal. I could finally look forward without feeling diminished. This victory wasn't about Sarah or Mark, it was about me. About proving that I had value, that my life, my dignity, couldn't be ripped away by someone who only wanted to take advantage of me. The moment I heard the sentence was strange. I stood there, feeling my heart pound, when the judge confirmed that I had the right to dignity, justice, and that the humiliation I had suffered would not go unpunished. I felt a mixture of tears and relief that I can't describe. It wasn't an explosion of happiness, it was a deeper feeling. Recognition that I exist, that my life matters, that my hands, my choices, my story are no less important than anyone else's. I thought about all the days I cried alone in the workshop, all the times I thought about giving up, and I felt a growing strength. For the first time in months, I smiled inside without guilt. I didn't need to prove anything to her or to Mark, but I did need to prove it to myself. And I did. After the hearing, I returned to the workshop. Everything looked the same, but I knew I had changed. Every tool, every car, every smell of grease had a new meaning. Before they were just work tools. Now they were symbols of my strength, my perseverance. I sat down on the bench, took a deep breath, and felt life returning. The fatigue was still there, but mixed with pride and clarity. I spent the afternoon organizing the workshop, thinking about the next steps, about my life, about what I wanted for myself. The pain was still there, but it no longer defined me. I was in control, and that was liberating. That night, at home, alone with my thoughts, I realized I was different. I no longer felt afraid of Sarah. I no longer felt ashamed, only a mixture of relief, strength, and hope. I looked at my reflection in the mirror and saw a man who survived, who didn't let himself be broken. There was still pain, of course. Betrayal doesn't disappear overnight, but something had changed. I was no longer the victim. I was the survivor, and that in itself was a huge victory. For the first time, I felt I could look forward without fear, without feeling like I had to hide my life or my choices. I could be myself, without excuses, without shame, without anyone putting me down. And that was liberating. In the days that followed, I began to feel a strange mixture of freedom and responsibility. The freedom of no longer being weighed down by humiliation, lies, and contempt, but also the responsibility of truly rebuilding my life with my own hands, without anyone diminishing my worth. Each morning, when I entered the workshop, I felt like I was starting over, not as before, because nothing is ever the same again, but as someone who has learned to fight and stand firm. The silence of the workshop became my ally. I spent hours there, organizing tools, fixing cars, but mostly reflecting on who I am and what I deserve. I remembered every night I spent crying alone, every early morning I spent thinking about giving up, and I felt that each of those nights had prepared me for this moment. The sense of strength I carried was unlike any previous pride. It wasn't just about the work, It was about what I had survived, what I had achieved within myself. The strangest feeling was realizing that the pain wasn't over, but that I'd learned to live with it without breaking down. I still remember the messages and audios, the cruel words, the contempt etched in her every gesture. They came to mind from time to time, but now they didn't paralyze me. On the contrary, they strengthened me. I realized the true strength doesn't come from ignoring pain, but from facing it and standing tall. I began writing down my ideas, organizing my work routine, taking care of myself. And little by little, hope returned. The hope that life could be different, that I could love again. But first, I needed to respect myself. Every small victory, like fixing a complicated car or completing a renovation at the workshop, gave me a sense of power over my own life that I'd never felt before. Over time, I also began to realize that some relationships had changed. Friends who had stuck by me became even more important, and those who had drifted away showed their true colors. I learned not to care about what I couldn't control, especially the opinions of those who had despised me. Sarah and Mark became just part of a painful past, one I carried, but which could no longer define my future. I began to value every gesture of honesty and friendship, every person who treated me with respect. And suddenly, I felt lighter, more secure. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone, only to myself. And that was enough. I began to believe again in my worth, in my ability to build, to love, to live with dignity. It was during this period that I understood something fundamental. Overcoming pain isn't about erasing it, it's about learning from it. Every sleepless night, every tear shed, every feeling of failure taught me something. It taught me that I can endure more than I imagined, that my life doesn't depend on anyone's approval, and that self-love is the foundation of everything. I started to take better care of myself, to pay attention to myself, to what I truly want. Working in the workshop became not only a source of income, but a refuge, a constant reminder that I built my life alone and can rebuild it whenever necessary. The feeling of rebuilding was so powerful that it made me proud of every step I took, even the most painful ones. Looking back today, I realize that that day in court changed everything, not only because of the public acknowledgement of the truth, but because of what it taught me about myself. I discovered that I can face anything, that pain doesn't have to defeat me, and that I can create my own happiness, regardless of who's by my side. The humiliation I carried turned into strength, shame turned into courage, and sadness turned into clarity. I still feel remnants of that pain, but no longer as a burden, but as a reminder that I survived and became stronger. Every morning I wake up, I feel I can live again, with dignity, with hope, and with the will to build something of my own. In the days that followed, I began to realize that my life was changing from the inside out. The pain was still there, but it no longer paralyzed me. Each morning was a reminder that I had survived, that my strength depended on no one but myself. I began to plan small things I hadn't thought of before, renovating the workshop, learning new techniques, organizing my routine in a way that made me feel useful and complete. The bad memories still came, of course, but I wasn't afraid of them. I felt like I was learning, and that was liberating. For the first time, I realized that my story didn't need to be defined by what someone did wrong to me, but by what I chose to do next. Little by little, my relationship with myself began to change. I began to value myself more, to recognize my achievements, my abilities, and my strength. I realized that true victory wasn't in humiliating those who had wronged me, nor in proving anything to others. It was in reclaiming my life, my dignity, my right to feel complete. I began to invest more in myself, in my work, in the people who truly mattered, and in everything that made me feel alive. Each day was a new opportunity to prove to myself that I was stronger than the pain I carried. One of the most defining moments of this phase was realizing I no longer needed to hide my feelings. I cried when I needed to, took deep breaths when I was nervous, and celebrated every small victory. The pride of simply existing and moving forward, despite everything, became a silent force that accompanied me every day. I understood that overcoming doesn't mean forgetting, but learning to live with the pain without letting it define me. Every tear, every sleepless night, every moment of despair contributed to my reconstruction. Today, I still feel the scars. They're here, inside me, as a reminder of everything I've experienced and overcome. But I no longer feel ashamed. I no longer feel afraid. I no longer feel like my life depends on anyone's approval. What happened transformed me. It taught me that I can fight and win, even when everything seems lost. That I can build my own happiness and dignity, even if someone tries to destroy them. That I can feel whole and strong without needing to prove anything to anyone. And that, above all, my life is worth the effort I make to protect and respect it. If I could give one piece of advice to someone going through something similar, it would be, don't let yourself be destroyed by someone else's contempt. The pain exists, the humiliation exists, but so does overcoming it. Every step, no matter how small, counts. I lived through one of the cruelest moments of my life, but I survived, got back up, and learned that my strength doesn't depend on anyone but me. Today, I can look ahead, take a deep breath, and feel that my life is mine. That my choices, my work, my effort, and my dignity cannot be taken away. I learned to live again, with hope, courage, and self-love. And that's what I want to remain, the certainty that it's possible to rise again, even when all seems lost.
My mom ignored my call for help in an emergency, and what I discovered changed everything forever. I always thought my life was somewhat normal, amidst the chaos everyone experiences at home. My name is Raphael. I'm 17 years old, and for a long time, I felt invisible in my own family. My mother was always so worried about my sister Helena that it felt like I could disappear and no one would notice. It's not that she hated me or anything, but her attention was completely consumed by her health, crises, and I grew up learning to swallow my own needs, my fears, and even my pain. I got used to feeling small, to pretending to be strong just to avoid getting in the way. But that day, everything changed in a way I'll never forget. It was a random Saturday, and I started feeling a pain in my abdomen that grew worse by the minute. At first, I tried to ignore it, thinking it might just be something I'd eaten, but the pain became unbearable, throbbing, and it felt like no one would hear my body. Screaming. I stayed alone in my room trying to calm myself, but every breath I took made it hurt more. I called my mom, asked her to check on me, and she came over with that distracted look on her face, thinking I was overreacting, that it was teenage drama. In that moment, I felt a mixture of fear and anger, as if my body were begging for help and my mom couldn't see it. It was the first time I realized how truly alone I felt. My sister Helena noticed before anyone else. She came into the room, helped me sit up, brought me water, and tried to calm me down. I looked at her and felt enormous relief, but at the same time, a huge sense of guilt for depending on her. I'd always tried to be independent, never wanting to be another problem in her life, but at that moment, there was no way out. I needed someone who would truly see me. Helena held my hand and told me the pain wasn't my fault, that Mom would understand later. I believed her because, for a long time, she was the only one who truly looked at me and cared, even when I didn't say anything. When my mother finally understood the seriousness of the situation and took us to the hospital, fear mixed with suppressed anger. I had acute appendicitis, and it was only then that she realized her distraction could have cost me my life. In the emergency room, as the doctors tended to me, I saw my mother sitting, her hands shaking, looking at me with guilt and despair. It was a mixture of relief and frustration. Relief that I was being cared for, frustration that all of this could have been avoided if she had seen me sooner. It was hard to realize that for years, my pain and my needs had been invisible. What struck me most was the feeling of helplessness. I could no longer pretend everything was fine. I couldn't swallow what I felt and carry on as if nothing had happened. That day showed me that I needed to fight for myself, that I couldn't wait for others to spot my signs alone. I also saw that my mother wasn't evil, just overwhelmed and blinded by concern for my sister. It was there, in that mixture of pain, fear, and anger, that something inside me shifted. I began to understand that I needed to stand up for myself, show that I mattered, and that I could survive this neglect without carrying the weight alone. After the surgery, the time in the hospital was a shock of emotions. I was hurt, fragile, and in pain, but also more aware of how much my mother needed to change the way she saw me. I saw in her a mixture of guilt and fear that I had never felt so intensely before. She didn't say much, but her looks and the way she held my hand said it all. She had finally understood that ignoring me had real consequences. And I, even though I was still hurting, felt the need to forgive, but also to set boundaries, to make it clear that my voice needed to be heard from then on. My sister Helena was with me through it all. She scolded me when I tried to hide my pain, encouraged me to ask for help, and reminded me that my mother wasn't perfect, but could learn. She was my anchor, the one constant reminding me I wasn't alone. Seeing my sister so strong, even dealing with her own chronic pain, inspired me. For the first time, I felt I could truly count on someone in my family, and that perhaps I could teach my mother to see me too. When I returned home, I felt a huge weight. My already difficult routine became even more intense. Appointments, medications, worries about my health and my sister's. But now I had a clarity I'd never had before. I realized I could no longer swallow my frustrations. I had to sit down with my mother, and with difficulty, explain how I felt. She cried, apologized, and promised she would try to see my needs without comparing them to Helena's. That didn't solve everything immediately, but it was a start, a real recognition that I mattered. Over time, I began to notice small but significant changes. My mother began asking me how I was, listening when I complained of pain or fatigue. It wasn't perfect, and there were still moments of forgetfulness, but there was a genuine intention to balance. And I learned that I didn't need to wait for everything to be perfect to feel like I mattered. I learned that my voice had weight, and that I could fight for attention without feeling guilty or ashamed. That experience showed me that I could be seen even in the midst of so many crises. What struck me most was the sense of responsibility for my own care. For the first time, I understood that I couldn't completely depend on others' attention. I began researching my symptoms, organizing myself with medication, and noticing warning signs in my body. This gave me a strength I didn't know I had. I learned that taking responsibility for my own care wasn't rebellion or a lack of trust in my mother, but rather a way to protect myself and fully exist. It was scary at first, but liberating at the same time. After leaving the hospital, I realized that a lot needed to change at home. My mother was still overwhelmed with Helena, but now there was a real awareness that I, too, needed to be a priority sometimes. I was afraid to demand attention, having been invisible for so long, but I also felt a silent urge to assert myself. That experience showed me that my body could no longer be ignored and that my desperation was justified. I had to learn to put myself first without guilt. Helena remained my ally, always spotting warning signs and reminding me to take care of myself. I realized that even when she was sick, she had a strength that inspired me. She supported me, encouraged me to speak up, and even helped my mother understand that I couldn't be treated like a dramatic teenager. For the first time, I felt a balance, albeit a fragile one, between the care we received and respect for our individual voices. This gave me hope that our family could learn to care for each other more equitably. My mother began to listen to me differently. When I complained of pain or discomfort, she now asked questions, tried to understand, and didn't minimize my complaints. It still frightened me because it wasn't automatic, but I noticed the effort. I felt she was trying to see me as a whole person, with legitimate fears, pains, and needs. This made me realize that her neglect wasn't malice, but a reflection of her exhaustion and overwhelm. Understanding this gave me patience and empathy, even when it still hurt me. Ultimately, that episode taught me the importance of demanding my rights at home. I didn't have to wait for my mother to notice my pain. I could speak up, communicate my limits and needs without fear. It was scary at first, but I felt stronger afterward. The experience of nearly being ignored in an emergency gave me clarity about who I was, what kind of relationship I wanted to have with my mother and my family, and how to protect my own emotional well-being. The emotional impact of that day still lingers with me. Sometimes when I'm in pain or anxious, I remember feeling alone and the urgency I felt for help. But now I also remember the strength I found. my sister's support, my mother's change, and most importantly, my ability to fight for myself. I learned that I can survive others' failures without destroying myself, and that even amid unintentional neglect, there is the possibility of rebuilding trust and care within my family. After everything that happened, I began to notice small changes in the family dynamic that I hadn't even noticed before. My mother became more organized, trying to balance her attention between Helena and me. She still made mistakes sometimes, but there was a visible effort. This gave me a sense of relief, mixed with caution, because I knew that real change takes time. It was strange to feel hopeful after so much abandonment, but I began to believe that I didn't have to carry the responsibility of being hurt alone. I also noticed how much more aware I became of my body and my needs. Before, I'd swallow any pain or discomfort, thinking it was drama. Now, I've learned to recognize warning signs and speak up without fear. I discovered that taking care of myself didn't make me selfish, but rather stronger. It's amazing how being nearly ignored in an emergency situation can awaken a strength you didn't even know you had. That experience taught me to fight for myself, even when no one else notices. Helena continued to be my source of support, even while dealing with her own condition. She was present and attentive, reminding me that my pain was real and important. I felt a mix of gratitude and guilt for relying so heavily on her, but at the same time, I realized our bond was strong. She helped me learn that I didn't need to carry the guilt of seeking attention or care. This relationship gave me the confidence to begin to trust that my mother could also learn to truly see me. My mother, in turn, began asking my opinion on medical situations, even minor ones, and listening to me without interrupting or minimizing. It was awkward at first, because I wasn't used to being taken seriously, but then I began to realize that she genuinely wanted to get better. This change brought enormous clarity. I realized that her neglect wasn't contempt, but a reflection of the stress and fear of juggling so many responsibilities at once. Understanding this gave me empathy, without erasing the pain I felt. The experience taught me something essential: the importance of putting yourself at the center of your own life. We can't completely depend on others to see or protect us. I learned to value my feelings, communicate my needs, and refuse to be made to feel invisible. I still deal with the emotional scars from that day, but I also carry with me the certainty that I can speak up, demand care, and rebuild relationships even after serious failures. It's a daily learning process, but a transformative one. Looking back today, I realized that that day of pain and near abandonment was a turning point in my life. I was 17, feeling invisible in my own home, but I learned that my voice matters and that I can fight to be seen. I still carry fear and scars, but also a strength I never knew existed. I learned the importance of prioritizing myself without guilt, of acknowledging my feelings, and of demanding care when needed. That experience taught me that surviving other people's failures is possible, and that pain can be transformed into learning. My relationship with my mother changed gradually. It wasn't immediate nor perfect, but there was real effort on her part. Today, she truly listens to me, asks how I am, acknowledges my needs, and tries to balance the attention she gives to Helena and me. I still feel angry and frustrated at times, but now I know I can speak up without fear. This process taught me patience and the importance of recognizing when someone is trying to improve, even after serious mistakes. The change was slow, but it was real. Helena continued to be my pillar, and our bond grew stronger. She didn't let me carry the blame alone, reminded me that seeking help isn't a weakness, and supported me every step of the way to be heard at home. Having someone who truly sees me made all the difference. It showed me that genuine support can exist even in imperfect families. Today, I understand that we don't need to expect perfection from others to survive and thrive, but rather seek support and strength where it truly exists. I've also learned that taking responsibility for my own body and emotional health is liberating. Before, I lived for the attention of others, but now I know I can and should protect myself, communicate my needs, and not let anyone else decide for themselves whether my pain is important. This learning has given me clarity, confidence, and hope. Even dealing with emotional scars, I can feel more secure, more alive, and capable of facing challenges without destroying myself. In the end, that experience transformed me profoundly. Today, I can see my emotions, put myself at the center of my life, and build more balanced relationships with my family. I still deal with the wounds, but they no longer define me. I learned to be resilient, to fight for myself, and to believe that even after unintentional neglect and pain, it's possible to rebuild trust and care. I know I will continue to grow and learn, but I also know I survived, and that is already a huge victory.